Okay, hello and welcome to our Wednesday night live stream. I am your host, Dana Morningstar, and this is a live stream that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So if you are new here, welcome, and if you are returning here, welcome. So we had some questions from last week that some people wanted me to answer. And I am not sure actually if I still have them because my computer shut down without me doing it. So I'm going to review them with as much clarity as I can remember. The first question had to do with whether or not narcissists could change. And this is something that, that we cover fairly often, but I think to best answer this question, it helps to examine behavior through the lens of the stages of change. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar at all with the different stages of change, but there's 5 of them. And this is these stages of change. It's called the trans-theoretical model of change. And it was developed by 2 psychologists, I want to say back in the 60s, maybe it was even a little bit later than that. Anyways, the model was originally used to describe the process of how people struggling with addiction, where they are in the process of changing. But these stages of change can be used to describe any type of behavioral change. So there's 5 stages. There's pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, and maintenance. And we are all, so here's what's really interesting about this. We are all in these different stages of change throughout our life in various ways. So when any of us are at this pre-contemplation stage of change, when we're there, we don't realize, we haven't even begun to think about changing. Whereas when we're in the contemplation stage, contemplation means we're thinking about changing. So pre-contemplation means it's not even a glimmer in your eye. It hasn't even crossed your radar. And it could be for anything, positive, any type of change. It could be you want to write a book, you want to change careers, you want to become sober, you want to leave a relationship, you name it. So pre-contemplation, a person is not aware that they have a problem. And you can tell, another person can tell where other people are based on their behavior and based on also kind of what they say. So when a person is in this pre-contemplation stage, they don't realize that they have a problem. So if you were to say something to them about possibly getting sober or needing to stop, you want them to stop cheating, that they have a problem with drinking and driving, that they really should go back to college and make a career change. If that's not where they are, then they're going to be like, what are you talking about? I don't have a problem. I don't need to change anything. My life is just fine. So they'll say they will not be interested in changing. They will, with problematic behavior, such as like addiction or abuse, they are very quick to blame other people. They're very quick to kind of shirk any accountability for it. It's never their fault. They don't have a problem. You're the crazy one. You're too sensitive. It's too big of a deal. They don't have an issue. Contemplation is when a person starts kind of toying around with the idea of, hey, you know what? Maybe I do need to make a change. For a lot of people struggling with addiction, oftentimes it's the first DUI, maybe it's the second DUI. There tends to be some sort of pain has to be involved in order for us to be motivated to do something different. We have a bad day at work and we're like, you know what? Not only do I hate my boss, why am I here? Like, I don't like any of this. Like, I don't like anything that I do. I need a complete change. And so that's when we start kind of thinking about, okay, well, what would I like to do? And then we start kind of toying around with what would be involved in change. So we're kind of weighing the pros and cons when we're in the contemplation stage. The next stage is planning. So at this stage, we're more invested in making the change. You know what? Yeah, I think I'm going to go back to college. I think I think I need to really kind of work on either getting sober or cutting back on my drinking. I need to do something. Some sort of change needs to happen with my behavior. That planning stage, then the person starts gathering resources. They're going to the internet, they're looking up things, they're kind of talking to some other people, they're really getting into it. Then the next stage is action. So in this action stage, this is when a person starts taking action. So if I want to go back to college, I would be, filling out transcript requests. I would be calling the registrar's office, figuring out, do I need to take an entrance exam? When do the semesters start? How much is tuition? What do you need from me in order to let me in? Right? So these kinds of things. So you're taking action and making this plan come to fruition. So for a person, let's say that they're struggling with addiction, the action stage would be, okay, they are figuring out, they might start looking up some local AA or NA groups in the area. They're figuring out, okay, what days and times do these groups meet? Which meetings which meetings interest me? Which meetings work with my work schedule? They might start cleaning out their house. And they're like, you know what? I need to just get rid of all this alcohol out of my house. Or I just can't hang out with certain friends right now. They're just too much of a trigger. So they're taking action on making their plan a reality. So this process, this action stage is ongoing, okay, for quite a while until these changes start to stick. Then after we make it into a lifestyle, then it becomes the maintenance stage where we're able to fairly effortlessly maintain things. So again, let's use the example of a person struggling with an addiction. They've got a new support system. They've developed new hobbies. They have a routine. They know which meetings they're going to be going to. They probably have a sponsor. Their time isn't so focused on maintaining their sobriety. Their time is more on kind of maintaining this new lifestyle. They're familiar with their triggers. They know, they're able to navigate life in a much more healthy, constructive way. And so this maintenance stage is ongoing. And for people that struggle with addiction, oftentimes, this is why they continue to go to meetings, because it's like they realize how much is on the line. So they're like, I don't want to backslide. This is why I'm still here. Is because it can happen. Addiction can just grab you. And the next thing you know, you've lost 5 years of your life, or 15 or 30, right? So it's the same thing with a person with any type of problematic behavior. They're going to go through those stages of change. So this is something that I see a lot of people get tripped up with often, is they mistake talk of change for change. But talk of change is just that, it's the contemplation stage, right? It's okay, I guess I'm open to going to therapy and we can do this, but you know what? It's not really my issue. It's our issue, and you're not perfect either. And, geez, I said I'm sorry. That kind of stuff. That's a person walking the line between pre-contemplation and contemplation. They haven't changed yet. Change doesn't even start to truly happen until a person is in that action phase, and they have to be in that action phase for quite a while. So let's take a different example. January 1st, right? We all get motivated. New Year's resolutions. We are motivated to change. We have some sort of plan. We've taken action. We've signed up for a gym. We're gung-ho. We're telling everybody, hey man, I'm going to get into really great shape this year. And we really mean it. And that lasts, maybe a month, maybe 3 months for most people. And then they backslide into their old ways. And so this is the challenge with change is it's not an easy process and it's not a straight line. So as a person goes through these stages, they don't go through them like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It generally goes 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 2. And it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, because there's so much trial and error to figure out a new way of being. So with narcissists, people like this, if a person doesn't have any awareness that they sincerely have a problem, they're not going to change, because change takes effort. It takes consistent effort on a very regular basis. And a person has to have that self-awareness to know to be able to be self-reflective enough to figure out, is what I'm doing, what am I doing right? What am I doing that needs improvement? How can I adjust? They need to be able to approach their behavior like that. But if a person doesn't think they have a problem, or if they think the problem is you, then they're not going to change. So promises of change are not the same thing of change. Bursts of action are not change. Change is only sustained behavior over a prolonged period of time. Little bursts of action. Okay, yeah, this time it's different. I'm going to go to therapy. We're going to go to therapy. And then they go for 3 sessions, 33 sessions, but then nothing really changes. Well, then they're not ready to change. So it can help to look at their behavior, or just behavior in general, through these different stages of change. Now, what can also help is when we are feeling frustrated with somebody else's behavior. You guys have probably heard the saying, it's important to meet people where they are. And what that means is where a person is basically in these stages of change. And the whole purpose of meeting them where they are is so that you're living in reality. So it doesn't work if a person's in that pre-contemplative stage. They don't think they have a problem with cussing and yelling and spitting and kicking and biting and doing all kinds of stuff. They have no problem with their behavior. They say some words, oh, this time it'll be different, blah, blah. And then they're basically at a level 1, maybe a level 2, but not really. More of like a level 1 with just some empty talk. But we're expecting them to be at that maintenance phase. Well, they've changed. They said that they would change. They said that this time would be different. The divide between stage 1, their stage 1 behavior, and our stage 5 expectations, that's where the frustration is. Because we're expecting them to be in that maintenance phase. They aren't there yet. So it will save you a lot of unnecessary frustration if you can understand where another person is. And then when you're fully aware of, yes, they're at stage 1. I really wish they would be at stage 5, but they're not. They're at stage 1. My expectations for them are at a stage 1. So I'm not going to expect them to behave any differently, because if I did, that's just wishful thinking. That's not me being optimistic. That's me being in denial. So when we adjust our expectations to meet reality, then we can actually start working effectively with reality. We can start responding to it instead of being so caught off guard by somebody's behavior. And that's, it's difficult. It takes when we have a person with problematic behavior in our life, it oftentimes takes everybody around them years, if not decades, to get to that place where we realize this is just where they are in life. And me begging and pleading and crying and threatening and screaming and yelling, that's not going to change them. Like, that change is going to have to come from within for them. So, yeah. And so Agatha says, I think she said she thinks the longest her ex lasted was about 6 months. Yes. And she says, and yeah, some narcissists can keep it up for about that time. Yes, they can. This is why I'm a big fan of 18 months minimum. And because people can be on their best behavior. Generally, 6 months is kind of a long time for somebody to be on their best behavior unless they're hiding what they're up to. If they're abusive, they might have a very difficult time being on their best behavior for 6 months. But if they're cheating, they're lying, they're stealing, they're doing stuff that's more easy to hide, they can hide that for years. They can really do a great job of acting the part. This is why I'm a big fan of that we have to get to this place where we kind of figure, okay, if I'm hoping that they're going to change, how am I going to be able to tell? How am I going to be able to tell? If they've shown me, if my experience with them has been nothing other than they have no moral compass and they're a chronic liar, how am I going to tell? Well, that's the thing, you're not. It's going to be very, very difficult because these people that are pathological liars, that are incredibly manipulative, the links they go to are extreme. I'm talking throwaway phones, hidden emails, credit cards that you don't know about, just all kinds of stuff. So I'm a big fan of, if a person shows you that they don't have a moral compass, believe that and don't try to make that work, because it's just, that kind of stuff is so deep. It's so much more than just lying or cheating. It's deeply problematic, pathological behavior. It's not a relationship issue. It's a character issue. And that stuff's not easily resolved. I don't even think it ever is, frankly. But, so, okay, then another thing that I wanted to point out with the stages of change. Okay, so there's kind of these 3 different levels to it, okay? So the first one is figuring out where somebody else's behavior is through their words, mainly more so their actions, because we can all talk, right? I've been talking about losing the same 20 pounds for I don't even know how many years. Okay, so we can all fall into this. So you got to look at actions, and you got to also, it helps to look at somebody's words. Then the second part with change is to examine where are your expectations of their behavior and where is their behavior. And then the third part to this is examining where our behavior is on these stages of change. This is the thing that trips people up the most. And it is such an absolute game changer when you can get to this level. So once you realize, okay, I have this person in my life, they have some sort of problematic behavior. They never really seem to get past stage 2. I get promises of change, or I get blamed, or they deny it. That's about it. Kind of they just go back and forth, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. My expectation of them has been that they will eventually change. It's a stage 5. I feel nothing but frustration and anger because reality is not matching my expectation. So now I'm in pain. And now it's this light bulb moment of, oh my gosh, then I need to do something different. So this whole time, while they've been in this stage 1, stage 2 behavior, and my expectations have been at a 5, I've really been at a stage 1. I've been at that pre-contemplation stage as well, because I didn't think that I had anything to change. You see this in TV shows like Intervention or Hoarders or, different My 600-Pound Life, these kinds of things, where you've got friends and family of this person with problematic behavior, and their friends and family are like, well, but they need to stop shopping. They need to get sober. They need to lose weight. And so for decades, they never thought that they should have to do anything different because they weren't the ones with the problem. But when you have people in a relationship and there is a problem, you've got a person who's abusive or has some sort of addiction, there's a problem within that relationship. If they aren't going to own it, then by default, we have to. So then we have to do something different. And this is what's so difficult. And this is why so many people struggle with taking action, because it's like, well, they're like, well, I don't want to leave. I don't want a divorce. I don't want to leave my relationship. I don't want to, I don't, basically, I don't want to have any deal breakers. I just want to stay in this relationship. I just want them to change. And the reality is, well, they're not changing. So at what point will you experience enough pain that you're now motivated to do something different? And so then this is when the families and friends and spouses of people with problematic behavior start moving into the contemplation stage of, oh, okay, yeah, maybe there is a problem. Well, geez, what could I do? I don't know if I'm really ready for a divorce. Maybe we could try therapy. Maybe we could do this. And they're kind of waffling. They're feeling out their options. They're going back and forth between pros and cons. And then they start making a plan. Well, you know what? I think maybe I need to go speak to a therapist, or I need to start gathering some resources. And then they move into the planning stage. Then they move into the action stage. Then maybe they join a support group, or now they're seeing a therapist on a regular basis, or they're doing different things. So, so I hope that helps. Yes. Alyssa says, I agree. I believe that is why the phrase, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, is a cliche, because it is so true. Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So then the second question, okay, Venus Tape asks real quick, how often do we do these live streams? It's every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So, and then InMag says, yes, my ex was court ordered twice for counseling due to his controlling issues. It didn't help. And this is one of the reasons, the main reason it doesn't help, because you are in effect dragging a horse to water and then forcing it to drink. And if you've got a person that already has issues with control, well, none of us really like, as adults, we don't really like being told what to do in general. It's 100 times worse if a person has major issues with authority and with control. So they're going to dig their heels in, and the needle's not going to move very far because they're incredibly defensive. So whenever a person is defensive, all these walls, these walls go up, and we're not listening. We're going into fight mode. So when any of us we get angry, we go into fight mode, the logic and critical thinking part of our brain goes offline. We become reactive. We're just completely emotional. So they're not there. They're not there. And there's no getting through to, there's no being logical or rational to a person who is in fight mode, who has the logic and rational part of their brain offline. That's just an exercise in frustration for you. And it can be profoundly dangerous because they are so reactive and they're viewing you as the enemy, especially because if they've been in this pre-contemplative stage where they don't think they have a problem. Because remember, in the mind of somebody, especially who's abusive, they have this mentality of how they feel is largely reality. So if they get frustrated, you came home late, they got frustrated, they feel entitled to yell at you, cuss at you, beat you up. If somebody cut them off in traffic, they feel completely entitled to flip them off, pull a gun, ram their car. And in their mind, it's all justified. Hey, you did this, I felt this way, but that's why I did this because you did this to me. That's a very immature behavior. Adult behavior, adults with a PMLity would call it a functioning containment boundary, where you're able to moderate your behavior. We understand, yes, it is infuriating when somebody cuts you off on the highway going 85 and then they slam on their brakes, right? That is infuriating. But we're still expected to behave appropriately. It's not okay to flip somebody off or to pull a gun on them or to ram their car. So you can get upset but there's still this expectation to be able to act appropriately. And that's the big piece of the puzzle that a lot of people in general are just missing, because it can feel so real. Well, yeah, this is why I did that. They look at what you made me do. That's the abuser's mindset. Look at what you made me do. You forgot to pay the water bill. And then they go off on this verbal tirade about, how, I don't know, stupid, fat, and ugly we are, right? And in their mind, it's completely justified because they got frustrated. And so this is why too, when people will say, they're like, well, Dana, but what if I really am all these things? Because they keep telling me this, and see, because there is kind of this kernel of truth to that, right? Well, I did forget to pay the bill. So, it's not like I'm not really, innocent in all of this. I actually did forget to do that. We all make mistakes. People get cut off. People have behavior, but there's still that expectation of treating other people with dignity and respect. So yeah, you might have forgotten to pay a bill. Yeah, you might have, I don't know, come home late or gotten in a car accident, or any of these things could have happened, but it's still a reasonable expectation that another adult person would be able to handle that appropriately. So, yes. And this is also one of the reasons why couples counseling, it used to be pretty standard practice for couples counseling to happen whenever a person was charged with domestic violence. And evidence-based practice is now that is not to be the case, because it tends to make abuse worse and not better. And this is one of the reasons why, because just like in the book we recently read about adult children of emotionally immature parents, how the author was saying, therapy isn't, if a person's going to therapy in order to basically learn some more kind of advanced coping skills and be able to actually to be real, to be able to work with these issues, there has to be a certain level of emotional maturity present. If that person is still kind of running games down here and they don't see it, and they're just kind of in this deep level of they're living unconsciously, basically, this level of darkness, then they don't have the emotional maturity needed in order to be honest with themselves, in order to make these kinds of changes. So for us, it just seems very obvious, like, well, geez, just stop yelling, or stop cussing or stop hitting. But that's because we've mastered these skills. Most people master these skills by about first grade. So for an adult to have not mastered those skills, that's a really, really big problem. And they have decades of emotional maturing that needs to happen. And if they're not motivated to go through that process, the needle's not going to move. They're not going to change unless they're actually motivated to start down that road. But even if they are motivated to start down that road, you got to realize they've got 10, 20 years of maturing to do. So this isn't going to be an overnight process. This is why it's so important for people to get clear on kind of where their deal breakers are with these things. I was reading an article the other day that I found really interesting about addiction. And it was saying, so often spouses of people struggling with addiction, they're so focused. And same, I would think with any type of behavior that's problematic like that, whether it's hoarding, abuse, you name it, they're so focused on getting their significant other to stop. And so then the whole relationship has gone into neutral. And the number one focus is on this behavior. And when that happens, the relationship isn't growing. There's not this like bonding and connection and all of this other stuff that's going on. It's literally that giant elephant in the room. And so then the spouse keeps thinking, well, if I can just get them to stop drinking or stop abusing, then everything will be fine. And even if that person does get sober, then here's the thing. We were talking about this last week. Gigi was saying, which I love this. She said, sobriety is not recovery. And basically what that means is just because a person stops drinking, even if they were to stop hitting or what have you, that's not recovery. They haven't dealt with the deeper issues there. This is why this kind of stuff, it might stop one way, but it might take a different form. So a person might stop drinking, but then they might take up smoking. They might take up gambling. They might take up exercise. They might take up sex. They might take up something else. So this kind of behavior is there to meet some sort of need, generally a need that we're not consciously aware of. And until that stuff's dug out and addressed, that person's still going to have a lot of problematic behavior to try to cope with whatever this underlying issue is. So anyways, according to this article, what they were saying was, is that the divorce rate is actually higher for people whose spouses do quit drinking. They do get sober, because then what happens is then the spouse is like, oh my gosh, I have been so out of tune with my own feelings. Because I couldn't have them. I was so busy on trying to get this person sober and doing damage control. And it was just soaking up all of my mental and emotional energy for so long that I wasn't in tune with how I felt because I was so focused on them. And now that they're sober, now I'm becoming more aware of how I actually feel. And I'm really angry. And then now they've got to start working through all of that. And then once they realize, oh my gosh, this is going to be this long road for me as well. And the partner who's now sober, they weren't there. They weren't there for all of the hurt and heartache they caused because they were drunk or high. Or in the case of abuse, they're deeply unconscious. They're not, they've spent decades not owning their behavior. So they're not consciously aware of it. And here's the other thing too, is a lot of people think, back to the whole changing thing, is they think, oh, well, if I got this person into therapy, or if this person started even going to individual therapy, that can really kind of move the needle. Here's the thing. If a person has spent all of this time denying reality, well, actually, let me back up. Two people in general, it could be your identical twin, okay? Two people are never going to share the same version of reality. They're going to perceive things differently based on all different kinds of factors. But the divide is huge when you're talking about a person who is like who's actually in reality versus a person who's been denying it and blaming other people and shirking responsibility, all of that. They do not have the same reality as you. They're not going to go into therapy and say, oh yes, Mr. or Mrs. Therapist, thank you so much for seeing me today. I'm here because I have these power and control issues, and my spouse acts, periodically, whenever my spouse does something, I just get really upset. And then I start, screaming or yelling and cheating and doing all of these kinds of things. And I'm really here today to become a better spouse so I can be fully accountable for my behavior. That's not what they're going to go in and say, at least not anytime soon. So most people never get to that place, especially people that have such kind of this deep unconsciousness about their behavior. Oh gosh, it is so warm in here. Okay, let me scroll up. Jack says, I'm lost on what the chat topic is. We were talking about change. There were two questions that I had at the end of the chat last week, and that I wanted to start off with. So one of them was about whether or not narcissists could change. And so we were just talking about the different stages of change and where our expectations were in there, and then where our own behavior was in there, and kind of the disconnect between all of that and what that means. So then the second question, let me hop into the chat and see if we have any questions or comments or. Crystal, ooh, this is kind of concerning to me, Crystal. She says, to talking to Grace, she says, imagine how tolerant we will seem to a healthy partner. I can't even imagine what a healthy relationship will feel like. Let's just take a time out real quick and address that, okay? Because I think there's quite a few people that kind of feel that way. Think, well, man, you know what? I am just so kind of ever forgiving, and I really I bend over backwards to please my partner, and I give and I give and I give, and I'm just so go with the flow. I just do such a good job of working as a team. And more often than not, what that tends to mean is it's people-pleasing behavior. And in short, it's a problem if we are tolerant of things that we shouldn't be tolerant of. So any relationship is going to cause us pain until we figure out a couple things, until we're aware of when we know that we're being treated in a way that we are not okay with, that's crossing a boundary with us, and that we're able to somehow correct that imbalance. So we're able to either assert ourselves or get some sort of physical, emotional distance or do something different in order to correct that imbalance. But for a lot of us, our toolkit with the way we interacted with the world and solved problems was through niceness. It was through niceness, or it was through hoping and coping. Boy, I really hope that person will change. Well, I guess I'll just cope with it if they're not. And in either way, I'm just going to be nice. This is how I navigate the world. And then we all think we're empaths, right? I'm just so nice. I'm just so caring. I'm so compassionate. Oftentimes that's synonymous with I have no boundaries. So if two people are really having a healthy relationship, there needs to be two healthy people present. And for two people to be considered healthy, there has to be this level of emotional intelligence and emotional maturity present. And a big part of that is knowing where our lines are, when things have been crossed for us, and having the kind of relationship where we can talk to the other person and have that vulnerability and say, hey, you know what? Something happened the other night. I think we should talk about it. I'm just really not okay with this. And that they can do the same. And that nobody's walking around being tolerant of stuff, that people are able to speak their mind and say, hey, you know what? Like, I know you really like going to this one restaurant every single Friday night. I'm not a fan. Like, can we try going someplace else periodically? Because this is actually our ongoing issue. I'm vegetarian, and this one place doesn't have a lot of options for me. And so then it was the old me wouldn't have said anything, because it was sort of like, well, I don't want to be a bother. Well, it's not a big deal. And the new me, it's like, it's totally not a big deal. It's not a big deal for me to say, hey, can we alternate and go just to some different places periodically? So we've got to be able to assert ourselves and have that voice in order for us to bring forth our healthy self. So a healthy relationship isn't just being in a relationship that doesn't have abuse. It's being in a relationship where you've got two authentic people present that are sharing themselves in an authentic way. And if that happens, and ideally it will, there's bound to be conflict, because you've got everybody, each person's different. Everybody's got their own thoughts and preferences and opinions and things like that. So anyways, I hope I didn't feel like I was picking on you, because I'm definitely not, but you brought up something that a good point that I see a lot of. Kim was saying, that her ex has been verbally attacked her during a counseling session. Yeah. And if that kind of stuff happens, if anybody's even thinking about getting into counseling with a person who is abusive in any way, shape, or form, or aggressive verbally or otherwise, I think it's really important to lay down some ground rules with the therapist in the room, and to make it very clear that even though this is the place of kind of the airing of grievances, that there's still this expectation of dignity and respect. So you can be upset with me, and I can be upset with you, but certain things, like, here are the rules for engagement. There's no name calling. There's no becoming intimidating. There's no yelling. There's no bringing up, using what's said in therapy or using another person's past against them. And we talked a little bit about this last week, but this isn't the same as they say something in therapy or you say something in therapy that's somebody else's deal breaker. So if they bring up the fact that they've been cheating or they started drinking again, and you're like, oh, whoa, okay, no, I'm done. I'm done. Like, we need to separate, or I want a divorce. And if they were to say, oh, well, you're using what I said in therapy against me. No, you're being self-protective. Using what they said against them would be along the lines of, if they had said that their father left when they were a child, and then you were to say, oh, well, geez, no wonder your dad left. You're insufferable. I would have left too. That's below the belt. That's not okay. That kind of stuff is hitting a person in their emotional soft spots. But and it's okay. If you start getting attacked in therapy, it's okay to just be like, you know what, I'm done, and to leave the room and just say that I'm not okay with this. I'm not going to sit here and be abused. Let's see here. In Mag says, random thought, if someone has to tell you to trust them, they cannot be trusted. Yeah, I agree. And here's the thing. People that are trustworthy generally don't think to say stuff like that. There's no need to reassure the other person. This is if you've ever seen any of these videos where they talk about how to spot a liar, or like kind of criminal profiling kind of stuff. One of the biggest things with liars is they keep talking, and they'll give a bunch of extra detail that a person who's not lying wouldn't give. And the reason is, when we're telling the truth, we don't tend to give all of this information. We just stick to the facts. So if we're hanging out and I don't know, say I'm running late and I get there and you say, hey, where have you been? Oh man, I was caught in traffic. If that was the truth, it would just leave it at that. If that wasn't the truth, then the person tends to start going on and on and on. Oh, I spilled my coffee, and then the traffic was bad, and then it was this, and it was that, and it was this. And the reason they keep talking about is they know on a subconscious, unconscious level that they're lying. And so they're basically talking to say more, to convince themselves, to try to paint a more convincing story. Because just keeping to the facts, on a weird unconscious level, we realize it doesn't seem like enough. It's like we have to create this whole story to try to convince other people, because we know that we're lying. So yeah, that's the same thing. Like if we were sitting on the subway together, right? And I were to come sit down next to you and I were to tell you, I just want you to know that I am not going to steal your wallet. You would be like, what? And what would you do? You'd probably move your wallet far away from me, as you should, because that's a weird thing for somebody to say. It's kind of a given that somebody's not going to sit down next to you and steal your wallet or your purse. And if they do start talking about that, it's sort of like, why are you talking about that? That's weird. You see this a lot with online, or not even online. I mean, I think especially more so with online dating, but dating in general, where a person will say, you know what, I would never do anything to hurt you. You can trust me. And they start speaking in absolutes like that. I would never do X, Y, Z. Well, yeah, I mean, again, we don't tend to need to reassure people of things that we would never do. Like, I would never commit murder. I would never steal your car. I would never, ever, I don't know, whatever, because we wouldn't do it. It's not even on our radar of thinking of it. So we're not trying to reassure the other person of our intentions, because it's a given. That's a great example, Dandelion. She says, this is like my mother telling me that we're a good family, but she had to make that point to me. Why? Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. When somebody has to keep pointing that out, it's kind of like, it's just a given. It's either we are like this, and then we all know, right? If we are happy or creative or fun or loving, everybody knows the dynamic. So it doesn't need to be said or reinforced, because we all know. So, and here's the other thing too. Yeah, Dandelion was saying that her ex used to always say, I'd never hurt you. You know that, don't you? And she says, now that I see that for what it is. And here's the thing too. Right off the bat, they are lying. And when a person speaks in absolutes like that, especially when they say something like, I will never hurt you, what that tells me is that they are emotionally immature. And I'll tell you why. Because a mature person understands that when you have two authentic people in a relationship, there's going to be conflict. Toes get stepped on, feelings get hurt. This is part of it. Ideally, it would not be intentional, right? But sometimes things happen. I mean, you make a joke that you thought it was funny and it ended up hurting their feelings. You say, I don't know. I mean, there's a million different ways that that hurt can happen unintentionally in a relationship. It's not about promise me that you'll never hurt me, because here's the thing, nobody knows where anybody else's boundaries are. So, we might be able to joke with one person one way, but another person, it's not funny. And so that just kind of takes some feeling out with time. But what's more important isn't so much that we never hurt this other person. It's that we are accountable if that were to happen. So it's more convincing to me for somebody to say, I just want you to know that I want to be authentic, and I want to have this real relationship with you. And I want us to be able to have the kind of communication where I don't want either one of us walking around feeling resentment or frustration. Like, I want us to be able to be a team. And in order for that to happen, let's promise each other that when stuff comes up, that we will bring it up with each other, and that we're going to work as a team towards a solution. Because that's realistic. Saying that, okay, I'm never going to hurt you, isn't. That's just pillow talk. Oh, geez. Stephanie says her last person she dated says, I lie to other people all the time, but I'd never lie to you. Yikes. That's a scary thing for a person to say. And that would be enough to run for the hills. Because here's the thing too, is it's not just about how they treat you, it's how they treat other people. Because especially other people that can't benefit them, really. How do they treat the mailman or the waitress or the person who works at the movie theater or, the homeless guy on the corner or your pets, their pets? just kind of these different people that we all kind of come into contact with, how that's so much more telling of a person's character versus somebody that they're trying to impress. And if a person tells you, because when a person basically says, yeah, I lie to everybody, well, but I'm not going to lie to you, that's probably another lie. And even if they were telling the truth, for somebody to be like, you know what, I don't have a moral compass with anybody else, but I do with you, that's still not going to end well, because that stuff's, that stuff just never ends well. It's going to negatively impact your relationship. Okay, let's see here. Okay, it looks like Elizabeth has a question. Oh, and she says, I have a question, but I don't want to be annoying. Yeah, totally not annoying. What happens is, and thank you, Jack, for explaining that. He says, you might need to ask again as Dana doesn't catch everyone. Yes, and what happens is I stop the chat when I'm talking because I can't read and think and talk all at the same time. Like my hamster just falls off the wheel. So if I don't get the question, which I probably missed quite a few, that's why. And it's not personal. So keep asking and see if other people can get my attention. Let's see. So I'm scrolling back here to see if I can find okay. So I think this is your question. Elizabeth says, any advice on dating after abuse? How to approach someone if I feel shy? Are we talking like a total stranger, or are we talking about somebody that you know, or what? And actually, while you're answering that, I'm going to address Jeffrey's comment because this is a good one too. He says, Dana, that's absolutely not true. Trustworthy people who have been abused would say, trust me, if their abuser never validated their experience. I could see that. However, that has not been my experience with the way people have worded that. It's generally that they're afraid that they're not going to be believed. So they might say something like, this is probably going to sound crazy, or I swear this is what's going on, or I know this sounds crazy. But it's, I don't know. I'd have to think about that one a little more. I have not encountered that. I'm not saying that you're not right. I could see where you're coming from, and I could think of maybe some situations where that would be the case, but I don't know. Can you give me an example of that in motion so we can kind of look at that closer? Because that's a really valid point. Carson asked Dana, do you know what your Myers-Briggs personality type is? I'm so curious. My guess is ISFJ. I took that test a long time ago and I do not remember. So I'm just curious, why do you think it would be ISFJ? And that's a good point, Jennifer. Oh, you guys have so many good questions. Okay, Jennifer says, do you think people with CPTSD might go into detail while being truthful because they don't trust themselves? They might, and I'm not saying that detail is necessarily a bad thing. It's unnecessary detail about kind of insignificant things. I mean, I'm not saying that this is like 100% of the time, like you could set your clock by it kind of a thing. It's just, this is what, when people lie, they tend to over explain things that don't need over explaining. Most of the time our communication is fairly cut and dry, because if we're being honest, because we expect to be believed. With people with CPTSD, I guess it depends. It depends on the situation. I mean, I guess what I did and what I have seen from other people is the detail that people tend to give. It's like a brain dump. So if they're so desperate to be heard, or if they're trying, we get this all the time in the support group. People will come in and it's their first, second, third post, and it's just, it's like an essay. It's really long, and it's just this kind of cathartic release of, oh my gosh, you guys get me. You've been through this too. Blah. Like, here's my story, and then they just get it all out. So, but it's, even then, it's not even like a ton of detail per se. It's just a lot of their story. So it's not a lot of detail around one thing. It's kind of, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And it's a lot, they're hitting a lot of the high points. When I first got into therapy with my story, with my experience, I was very hesitant, because saying it out loud made me feel, I just felt like nobody's going to believe this, because it was so outrageous and over the top and I just didn't, I was so reactive, and I was so angry, and I was just a mix of emotions that I didn't have the ability to stay kind of cool, calm, and collected, or I didn't have the patience for somebody. I was a live wire. Like, I just didn't have the patience or the ability for anybody to even doubt what I was saying. I was just very reactive. I'd instantly just become really angry really fast. Because, you've already been violated. And then for somebody to start coming back with, well, maybe it's a couples thing, or maybe you misread it, or how do you know? And all this kind of stuff is absolutely enraging. Sarit says, well, is this why the narcissists say that they love us so much? I think a lot of times when you have let's just back it up even a little bit further. Emotionally immature people, especially narcissists, they live in this fantasy world. So it's where a lot of times there is this love bombing. They're just very emotion driven. So it's very much like, oh, I feel really intensely towards you. That means I love you. But for them, it's just words. Like, for an emotionally immature person, there's no depth there. So for them, it's like, oh man, like I love this ice cream. This is so amazing. But then I love you. You're so amazing. It's on that same level. Whereas a person that has emotions, that has that emotional depth, we understand that there's differences between how much my love for, the love I have for ice cream is different than the love I have for a significant other, which is, different than the love I have for, my brother, which is different than the love I have for, I don't know, Game of Thrones, which is, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's different levels of love. So they tend to use words, I think a lot of times with a lot of kind of with narcissists, it's not even like, they may feel intensely towards another person, but because there's no real bonding there isn't what we would call love. Because I think most of us would say, okay, well, love isn't just that intense feeling where you're kind of lusting after a person or they're on your mind all of the time. Love is, it's action, right? It's care and compassion and consideration and appreciation. And uh, you look at a person who has a classic car, they love that car. Well, what do? They respect that car. You can't even look sideways at that car. And, they're going to run you off. They garage it, they wax it, they wash it, they take care of it. They tend to it. That's, obviously on a more car level, like that's the actions of love. In a relationship, it's the same way. Like there's that appreciation, that tenderness, that care, that it's ongoing. It's that ongoing level of maintenance that we put into a relationship to keep it running in peak condition. But for narcissists, it's not that. And it's just, it's all about kind of how they, how they feel. So. Okay, so let me scroll down and see if Elizabeth elaborated. Okay, oh gosh, I scrolled way up. Hold on. Elizabeth, let me. Oh, I was going to, okay, so while I'm looking for Elizabeth's explanation. Okay, Jennifer was saying about what Jeffrey had said about, well, maybe people with CPTSD, like they haven't been validated about abuse, so they fear people won't believe them about anything. Yes, and I think that's valid. However, from what I've seen and what I have done, that concern about being believed tends to really be based around their experience with abuse. If we go into work and I don't know, we call in sick. Well, even then, I guess I could see that because there were times where I would call in sick to work and I felt like they don't believe me. But I really was sick. I don't know. I'm going to have to chew on that a little bit more. Okay, let's see. Yes, Gigi says right after her first birthday, at the height of her shock and trauma, she spoke really fast and spoke incessantly about the craziness that she was experiencing and appeared as though she was manic. Yes, and that's what I did. That's, I would say, more common than not. The posts, the emails that I get, it's literally, it's like a manic brain dump. There's oftentimes punctuation that's missing. There's capital letters that are missing. It's just this cathartic purging of, here's my experience. I know that you guys will understand, kind of a thing. So right after my situation with Jack, two of the phone calls that I had made within, I guess, like that first week, the first one I think was to our landlord, because we were going to I was going to buy the property, and I had to let her know that I had moved out and that everything was off. And I was so, again, completely fresh out. My whole world had just been turned upside down. And when I was talking to her, it literally, I could hear the words coming out of my mouth, and I just sounded crazy. It was just this nonsensical, frantic conversation about he's a sociopath and he's been sleeping with everybody and everything was a lie. And I think he was trying to kill me. And I don't even remember everything that I said. It was just this, like, getting it out, letting her kind of know what had happened and why we were having to break off this contract. And she had made some sort of comment about like, well, she hadn't slept with him. And I know that was true, but well, actually, no, I guess I don't know that was true. But I really don't think that they did. I think the reason she was saying that is I think she thought that I was somehow implying that they had slept together. And that's when I realized I'm not making sense. And I'm trying to catch this woman up to speed on like 2 years of deceit. And it's not coming out as an explanation. It's just coming out as like the ramblings of a mad woman is how that's coming out. And then the phone call I made, I don't know, it was right around that same time, was to the police. And that was when I realized, oh my God, I bet there's a very solid chance that he was either drugging me or he was putting something in my food. And I had called them to find out, like, what do I need to let them know what had happened, what I need to do. And it was the same thing. It was just this, stream of consciousness, basically. And the officer on the phone, I could tell by their response that it was just sort of like, okay, lady. And then I stopped talking about things for a while after that, because how do you even begin to tell? I mean, how do you even begin to tell like another person everything that happened? It's so outrageous. It just doesn't sound real. So, okay. Yeah. And Meg says, I had a similar experience when I called and canceled my wedding dress. She said, I felt like a crazy lady. Yeah, it's terrible. Let's see here. Oh, well, good. Sarit says, thank you for the validation, having a lot of aha moments. Thank you for sharing. Your help is saving us. Yes, you are so very welcome. There's so much benefit in, I think, hearing the experiences of other people for that validation. And it also helps with kind of, I guess, the clarity and those feelings of shame and guilt or embarrassment. It helps to have those dissolved when you realize that you're truly not alone in this, that this is a thing that's happened to thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people. And it's not, I mean, I was shocked when I first started all this, when I started my blog and then later on down the road, my YouTube channel. I really thought, like, I hope somebody else stumbles across this. And it really, I felt like my experience was very unique, like a lifetime TV movie thing. Like, you just don't see it all the time. And then I began getting this flood of emails, and especially when I started going on YouTube, and I realized, oh my gosh, this is an epidemic. Like, this is not, I am not as alone in this as I thought. This is huge. Okay, Elizabeth, let me see. Okay, let's see. Can somebody help me scroll up and find if okay, here's her elaboration. She says, okay, the guy, how do you approach somebody when you are interested in dating again after abuse? She says, it's somebody I know, I kind of trust him, but I get so shy around him, how to overcome it. If you know him, then I guess I would just continue to try to spend more time around him. This might be a question. I'm going to throw this out to the guys in the group, because here's my take on it as a woman, but I would imagine for men, it's different. I've never come on to a guy. So if I was ever interested in somebody, I would spend time with them. you just kind of, I don't know, like you just kind of know when there's that click. And sometimes there's, I don't, I don't know, time that's spent where it kind of stays in the friend zone. And then there's time that's spent with somebody where, I think if a guy realizes that you're approachable, you're spending time with them, you're smiling, your body language is saying, hey, I'm interested, and there's kind of that connection, then I think most men, if they're interested in you, then they'll kind of take that initiative. But me personally, I would never, I'm not comfortable asking a guy out or kind of making the move. I figure if he's interested, then he'll make the effort. But I don't know. What do the guys in the group say? Neil says yes, but you need to meet someone before you can even get in the friend zone. Yes, and this is very true. No, I didn't. Thank you, Jennifer. She says, I'm not sure, but I hope you saw Joe Sauter's question and live stream donation above on AA. Shoot, how did I miss that? No, I didn't. Oh, I just realized why, because my side scroll bar was not all the way up. Oh, shoot. Joe, if you are still here, can you please post your question down below? I don't know if there's any way for me to see, to go back and see if there's questions. Joe, if you're still here, if you could please ask your question again. And if you guys in the chat can try to catch my attention so I can make sure to answer. And Joe, thank you for the live stream donation. Jack says, Dana, it's hard for narc-abused shy guys to pursue. With Julie, it was about friendship first, but she had a tendency to put my arm around her. Yeah, I think I think it makes it easier for everybody involved if there's, I don't know. I would imagine in general, it would be very difficult for a guy, or I guess a girl, right? Man or woman, to ask somebody out. And that's intimidating because you're putting yourself out there, you're being vulnerable. So I guess on my end of things, I've always tried to make it a point to give very clear body language one way or the other. If I wasn't interested, if I was out in public, I don't even know if I've ever had a guy offer to buy me a drink. Like if I have, it might have been one or two, and it was 20 something years ago. I don't remember, but I was normally I didn't like leading somebody on and saying, oh, sure, I'll go out on a date with you if I wasn't interested, or buy, you can buy me a drink if I wasn't interested. That just didn't seem right. So I would just make my body language very clear. If I just wasn't interested, I wouldn't, be smiling in their direction. I wouldn't try to look approachable. I would be, I don't know, on my phone or talking with friends or what have you. But then if somebody were to have approached me, I was always nice about it, because that is, that takes courage to even talk to somebody, let alone ask them out. Okay, thank you. Catlat says, here's Joe's question. I just became aware that I have a problem with addiction, not drug or alcohol related. I want to work on it. Would AA help, or some other support group? if it's not drug or alcohol related, the anonymous groups, they have quite a few of them. So they have groups for, they have Overeaters Anonymous, they have Gamblers Anonymous. I believe that they have, I want to say that they have like sex addiction, Sex Addicts Anonymous, these kinds of things. They have a lot of support groups that are online, so you can check those out. There's quite a few different types of recovery support groups out there. So you might want to just depend, and you don't have to say on here, but depending on the addiction that you have, you might want to consider joining a few different ones and seeing which ones resonate the most with you. There's support groups out there called Rational Recovery, and they're a little different from AA in that the 12 steps, like the AA, there's kind of a focus on a high, getting a higher power and kind of acknowledging that you are powerless over the addiction, versus like the rational recovery groups, they have a different approach. So there's not this focus on a higher power. There's, and I think that there is more of a focus on that we need to be able to gain control. So kind of similar, but different process. So you might want to, I don't know, you might want to just start your search on Facebook and just kind of see what online groups are out there, and if they have any in-person groups in your area. But I think with so much of this stuff, you've got to kind of hold on to what helps and let the rest go, because some of it will resonate with you and some of it won't. I think one of the nicest things about support groups is the sense of community, and there's no judgment. Everybody there understands. They've all, they're all going through it, and your experience is not as unique as you might think. So there's a lot of healing that comes from that. Joe says, I'm listening to a lot of Eckhart Tolle. He's helping a lot. Can I recover from addiction alone? I didn't feel powerless. It's just hard. And statistically speaking, people that are struggling with addiction, their chance of maintaining sobriety is substantially higher if they have some sort of support system that can help keep them motivated and keep them moving forward in their goals. It's difficult when we're kind of just going at it alone. It's like the accountability of a group is really helpful. But if, I think a lot of it's just sometimes trial and error, is trying to figure out, okay, well, what do you need in order to succeed? What have you tried in the past? What has worked? What hasn't worked? So we were talking about the stages of change earlier, and one of the stages in there is planning. So you have pre-contemplation, contemplation, planning, action, and maintenance. And during this planning stage, what a lot of us tend to do is we tend to try doing the same thing over and over again. So every January 1st, like, okay, I'm going to go join a gym. It's going to be different this time. New year, new me. And then what do so many of us do? Like that just fizzles out. And so in order for a plan to actually have merit and to be achievable, it has to be different than what we've tried to do before. Because if we tried before and failed, then trying to do the same thing the same way this time is not a good plan. So we have to do something a little different. So for example, if last time we tried and failed, we're like, okay, you know what? That's it. I'm going to go to AA. And we lasted 3 meetings and then we stopped going, to examine, okay, well, why? Was it that you get home from work at 6 o'clock and the meeting was at 6:20 and you didn't have enough time to eat and change and get there? And so you just said, oh, forget it. And that kind of threw off your stride? Or was it that you didn't like the meeting? Would you have felt more comfortable in a men's only meeting? Or would you have felt more comfortable in a mixed gender meeting? So kind of examining, why did this plan not work before? And so what we were talking about earlier is we all tend to go from, it takes quite a bit of backtracking and figuring out what works before we can actually get to that maintenance stage. So it's a lot of trial and error and continual adjusting along the way. And so you'll know when you start getting there, when you start getting the results that you're looking for. But yes, I mean, some people have been able to, get and stay sober by themselves. There was a study done a while back with Vietnam veterans who had come back from Vietnam who were addicted to heroin. And this study, the different veterans that they had studied did not go to any type of support group or anything long term. And so what they were kind of thinking was what helped these guys stay sober is, or to get sober after the fact, was that they had their own kind of community where they were just like, we don't identify, like they were just like, you know what, we were addicted to heroin over there, but over here, we're not, like we're veterans. And this is just, they had not made it a part of their identity. So it wasn't as ingrained in like their daily life. And it just wasn't, they hadn't made it a part of their identity. So I don't know. I think that's more the exception than the norm, though. So like I said, a lot of it's just kind of getting to know yourself and being honest enough with yourself to figure out what works and what doesn't and why. That's tough. Miss Marabella says, Dana, I was abused by a famous person and I'm constantly being re-triggered by seeing him in the media. Are there any tips? I guess outside of avoiding the kind of triggers that, might be associated with this person. Like if okay, let's say this person's an actor, a famous actor. If there's certain movies, possibly just avoiding, commercials, these kinds of things as much as possible, maybe watching Netflix or other things until it's not just so kind of debilitating to see these triggers. It might be something too that potentially starting a blog, an anonymous blog, and changing the name of this person and writing about your experience in just getting it out, changing your name, changing his name, getting it out. If there's, I don't know if you're open to talking to the police or filing a report, but that might help as well to try to get justice. But yes, there was a documentary I saw last week that was so profoundly angering, and my heart went out to these men and women. It was about sexual assault on college campuses, and I had never thought about this, but they were saying how profoundly difficult it was to see their rapist almost every day on campus and for nobody to believe them. And especially if their rapist had been somebody that was, like on the football team or somebody that was fairly popular on campus. And it was it was just heart-wrenching seeing what they went through. So yeah, so I can imagine that would be incredibly difficult to have that continual reminder in front of you. She says, yes, it was sexual abuse and he's adored by so many. And she says, yeah, it's much harder to kind of quote unquote get over because he keeps popping up. And I think that's the thing too, is with anything traumatic in our life, whether it be the death of a loved one or a sexual assault or a car accident or in anything that's on the spectrum of trauma, we don't quote unquote get over it. We have to go through it. And that's what's so difficult, is to sit with these feelings and to move through this. And that just takes time. I think something that can help with that is kind of giving in time, giving your pain a purpose, and offering. Sometimes it can help to just potentially, like I said, start a blog, have it be anonymous. You could put information out there for people that are in a similar situation, that they've been sexually assaulted by like a high profile person, whoever that might be. And I think sometimes just knowing that we're able to help somebody else, to reach out and just validate them, it gives that anger kind of a channel. It channels that anger into something positive, and kind of some forward momentum can come from that. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it too, it's feeling the way that you feel. Like, you have every right to feel angry and upset and hurt and outraged and and fearful and disgusted, and every single emotion that you feel. That's, very normal emotions for going through that, and then being continually reminded of that when you see him. Yeah, Miss Marabella says, yeah, it's the worst experience I've ever gone through, and it's been 3 years. Yeah. There was a gal that was in my support group. This was, I don't know, she might, if she's there, she doesn't post. I haven't seen her post in a while, but she had gotten tangled up with a very famous CEO of a major company. And it was just so malicious and so predatory. And this guy had been in this, I don't even know if he was married, in this long-term relationship with this woman. And he would go on dating sites and pick up women. He would completely lead them on, thinking that they were having this relationship and that he was serious about them. And he'd kind of bring him to this highest high of all of his future faking and everything. And they're going to have this wonderful life together. And then he would just drop them. And he had this, there's actually been several women that have written books about this guy. And I haven't read them. One of the books is called Him. And it's about the CEO. So, yeah. And so there's been this long trail of women that he has just destroyed emotionally over the years. And it's disgusting. It's, and she was in the same boat. She just really struggled with, like, how do you rebuild? Like, it's so, the injustice of it all and the victimization is just so outrageous. It's not something that, a person just bounces back from. Like, it takes time to work through all of those emotions, to be able to even start moving through it. Let's see here. Stephanie says, Dana, did you watch the R. Kelly special? No, I haven't. It's on my list of things to do, though. I've heard about it. I know it's going to really just absolutely enrage me. But yes, I need to. Let's see. Ricky asks, are all narcissists heartbreakers? No, not necessarily. I mean, they're all people, so they're all different. The thing with a narcissist is if a person, they might not be intentional about certain behaviors. If a person for a narcissist or a person who's on that spectrum of like problematic narcissistic behavior, if their self-orientation, if they're so self-absorbed to the point where there's no room for anybody else, it's just all about them all of the time. They don't, when you talk, they don't listen to you. When you have wants or needs, if they don't match up with theirs, then then those wants and needs aren't important. It's, there's no give or take. They just kind of suck all the air out of a room because it's just all about them all of the time. In relationships with a person like that, if they are some of them are not romantically inclined. Some of them are kind of, what's called like more of like a cerebral narcissist, where they are kind of very, very self-oriented, very self-absorbed, but they're absorbed in kind of these more like intellectual pursuits. And whereas some of them are more of like the somatic narcissists that are more focused on their level of absorption is all about like body and sex and these kinds of things. Those tend to be the ones that are more the heartbreakers, because a lot of times they go about getting their ego fed. This was what I was going to say earlier about the whole the love thing with narcissists. Sometimes they will love bomb their target, and they'll create this whole, like this guy I was just talking about, the CEO, they'll create this whole fantasy world. And it's to the target, it feels like if you're on the receiving end of that, you're like, oh my gosh, you're so wonderful. You're so amazing. We think that they're showering us with all of this love and attention because that's how they feel. But sometimes they're only doing that because they love to see the adoration we have in our eyes for them. So they love the fact that we're so in love with them. And that's where it just becomes really heartbreaking, because then they're just going to pull at a person's strings and go so over the top to be this person's perfect partner, because they love that feeling of being told, oh my gosh, you're so wonderful, you're so handsome or beautiful, you're so romantic, you're so this, that, and the other. And they like that feeling, but they could care less who that feeling's coming from. Okay, let's see. Doreen says that she found the documentary on R. Kelly very interesting. He's a narcissist and more. He's worse. He's been doing scandalous stuff for years. I don't know how it has taken this long to catch up with him, but it's been years and years. So yeah, and it's absolutely it's been disgusting, disturbing behavior for, at least 15 years that I know of. And people like that, again, they don't change. Like he sees no problem with it. Sees himself as the victim. He's, really enjoys, just degrading and humiliating and controlling women. And what's heartbreaking is that there's so many women that mistake all of that for love. Like, that's what breaks my heart. And here's the other thing too, is when a person's in a relationship like that, unknowingly, they're primed for future abuse. Because if they're mistaking all of that intensity, all of that excitement, and being all of this attention and affection and um, you know, the focus that a person like that puts on their target, it's predatory that they put on their target. And because that can lift a person to the highest highs. It's like, oh my gosh, I feel so loved and seen for maybe the first time ever in my life. Like, this is amazing. This only happens in the movies. I didn't know that this could happen in real life. And when these relationships end, if the person doesn't realize that was all part of the abuse, which oftentimes they don't realize that. They oftentimes think, oh, it was the physical acts. It was, the hitting or maybe the degrading kind of behavior. That was the abuse. They don't realize that all of that charm and intensity and all of that stuff was also part of the abuse. That was this kind of grooming, love bombing behavior. And if a person doesn't realize that was all part of the abuse, then they're going to seek that out because it felt so amazing. I've talked about this before, but I think the best movie that shows this is the movie How Stella Got Her Groove Back. It's an old movie from like the mid 90s. And she basically got tangled up with a con artist and I don't even know if she still realizes it to this day, to be honest. But in the movie, it was this love story, and he basically pretended to be her perfect partner. And then in the end came out, and this isn't in the movie, it was after the fact, that he was gay and he was suing her for millions of dollars. And, here she went from thinking that she had this amazing husband to, oh no, just kidding, I'm gay. And by the way, I want you to pay me millions of dollars, kind of a thing. So, but what was so sad is when she was on Oprah, her and her now ex were on Oprah, she was saying, he was so good to me that he's now the new standard that she measured every man to. And my heart broke when she said that, because everything that he did, all of that charm was all part of it. It was all part of the manipulation. It's not real. Normal people don't act like that. You might have this connection with them, but they're, like we were talking about earlier, in a healthy, real relationship, you have healthy, real people showing up. They're not going to be your perfect partner. There's going to be differences of opinions. So if everybody's, if the other person's just everything that you want all of the time, either they're not being real at a minimum. And that's kind of its own level of concerning, because best case scenario, they're incredibly passive and they don't like to bring up anything. They don't like conflict. But just because conflict isn't brought up doesn't mean that it no longer exists. It does exist. It just turns into resentment, and then that person just stews. And generally it's over stuff that doesn't need to even be stewed about. So Miss Marabella asks, do you know how to recover texts? He admitted what he had done via text. I do not, but I would contact your service provider, Verizon, Sprint, or whoever. And I would also call the non-emergency police, and you can make it anonymous, but I would let them know, you know what, I was sexually assaulted. This person admitted to it via text, and this is when this happened. And is there any way, if I were to move forward, that I can get these texts off my phone and see what they say? Okay, let's see here. I'm scrolling here. Okay, Jack asked Dana, Taurus Girl had asked, has anyone else developed obsessive compulsive tendencies when they were in the relationship with an ex narcissist. And Jack said, oh, Taurus girl continued, she noticed that her OCD habits had really simmered down and went away after the breakup when the stress was over. And then local tourist says, I used to have OCD issues when I was a kid. Here's my take on this. Okay. I don't know how accurate this is. This is just my take on it. Is one of the main drives that we all have is the need for control and the need for certainty in our environment. And one of the ways so much of this stuff is unconscious. So when I think a lot of this kind of obsessive compulsive type behavior tends to come from that. So if we can't control, if there's something in our life that's uncomfortable that we don't want to deal with, or that we can't deal with, or that's just causing us to feel out of control, it can be very common for people then to start focusing on what they can control. The problem with this is when this stuff isn't really consciously decided upon. This is what can be so scary, because it kind of just feels like a pinball machine. Like and it's all happening behind the scenes. And then next thing you know, and if you've seen any of these like, Intervention, Hoarders, 600-Pound Life, these kinds of shows, people, or any type of eating disorder or anything, people are like, well, okay, this kind of started after this event. They had a car accident, they had a loved one die, they had a divorce, they were in an abusive relationship, something happened. And then as a way to either try to kind of regain control in their life or to self-soothe, they kind of fell, this addiction basically grabbed them, is what it is. And then they just, because it's a sudden thing, but it's also a gradual thing. And so then next thing you know, you kind of come to years later and you're like, oh my gosh, how is it that I've got stuff in my house the piles are 5 feet high, or that I'm now 600 pounds, or that I'm now struggling with anorexia or binge eating disorder or bulimia, or, you name it. But that's really common. And I think in large part, this stuff is so common because as a society, we don't teach this, understanding our emotions, understanding pain, understanding trauma is not something that's readily talked about. And if I had a magic wand, it would be right up there. It would actually be more talked about, like sex education. It would just be part of school curriculum at a fairly young age, in an age-appropriate way. Because what do? None of the stuff is talked about. And then people's lives start kind of going off the rails. Maybe they realize that it's off the rails. They go through their first divorce. They have some sort of, they realize, oh my gosh, I think I have a drinking problem. There's some sort of painful event that happens. They get a DUI. They have a heart attack. There's something that happens where they're like, oh my gosh, we tend to call that a midlife crisis. But I don't even really think that that's what it is. I think a lot of times it's a person's life has not been working for a very long time, and they didn't realize that it was a problem. And so they've been coping in the way that they best, or the different ways that they best knew how. And then things got so bad, they just got to this breaking point. And now they're, they're just kind of doing whatever. But I think we'd all be so much better off if the conversation of how to handle pain and trauma and grief was brought up, if we were taught these skills before we needed them, because it's a hell of a way to kind of figure all this out. You have a loved one who dies, you fall into despair for potentially years. And then maybe you come crawling into therapy because you can't handle it anymore. And then you start learning about, there's different stages of grief and, this kind of how to start moving through these different emotions and all of that. But like, like, it'd be nice if this conversation was had before we needed it. So it doesn't have to get to that point of, coming crawling into a therapist's office. But yes, in terms of abuse, it is very common for people to start coping in a very wide number of ways. Addiction is a huge one, because if a person either doesn't want to leave or they can't leave, then they've got to become comfortable with staying. And for a person to become comfortable with staying in an uncomfortable situation, they've got to numb out somehow. And we tend to turn to kind of the path of least resistance, like whatever it might be, whether it's food or shopping or alcohol or prescription pills or you name it. Very, very common. Yes, I agree. Stephanie says, yeah, being stuck in the trauma bond is like an addiction in and of itself. Yeah. Yes, it really is. Let's see here. Let me scroll up. Yeah, and that's very true. Gareth says, you never get over losing loved ones. You just start to get used to it. Yeah, you have to create a new normal. Okay, let's see here. That's interesting. Gigi says she read a Canadian article today which stated that parental alienation is being conducted or considered for the ICD-11. Thoughts? I think any awareness on this is a positive. So it's a very real thing that a lot of parents go through. So, and I don't think it's readily recognized. My concern with, I guess, with that would be, it's great that the concept of parental alienation is there's attention being brought to it. I guess my concern would be is if kind of what level of training would different mental health clinicians have around that? Because to an outside, well, okay, even if a person has gone, if a person hasn't gone through something like this, it's very difficult to even understand what abuse is, because most people really don't understand what abuse is, even if they are mental health clinicians. So especially verbal, emotional, psychological, they're still kind of, unless they're more of like a trauma-informed mental health clinician, then yes. And of course, like there's the mandatory reporting, right? So like there's kind of this baseline understanding of like what problematic behavior is. But I will just say it's been my experience that even the understanding of abuse with mandatory reporting oftentimes doesn't like click over when you're talking about two kind of fully functioning adults in a relationship. Then it's more seen as, oh, these are just relationship issues, which is concerning. So I guess that would be my concern, is what is the level of kind of experience that mental health professionals would have with this? in general. And then also, it's very difficult for an outside person to be able to discern what's going on. Because oftentimes in an abusive relationship, there's a lot of reactive abuse going on. And there's a lot of he said, she said kind of stuff. And it can be very difficult to kind of pinpoint which parent is alienating which parent. So I think there's a lot that freaks me out, because for an abuser who has kind of this pathological view of reality, if they're spinning themselves into the victim, and if they're even remotely like malicious, or really kind of, they don't have to be malicious, but even if they are more kind of prepared, I guess, than their target, they can easily, keep text messages, kind of paint this picture that they are the victim when they really aren't. So that could really backfire. I guess for anything, what that tells me is that there needs to be more kind of victim education done, so people don't get caught up in that, because I'm sure that's going to happen right and left. That's kind of the same concern I have with people. There's different countries right now that are making like emotional or psychological abuse a crime, which I think is fantastic. The problem is abusive people think they're the victims. And I think it could very easily wind up where the targets now have a domestic violence charge on their record, or they're the ones that are going to jail. So, because abusers do a great job sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes they'll do a great job of like poking until the target explodes. And then they're like, well, you're so abusive. Look what you did, kind of stuff, which terrifies me. There was a video going around on YouTube a couple of years ago of I think it was a boyfriend and a girlfriend. And the guy had, it makes me almost physically ill even thinking about it. The guy had promised they were going to go to the beach. And they're driving in the car. And then he was like, oh, well, you know what? We're not going to be able to go to the beach. We've got to go get the tires rotated and everything else. And so she just has a meltdown, like temper tantrum, toddler level 10 meltdown in the car. And so he puts this video up on YouTube. And of course, all the comments are like, oh man, that chick is awful. She totally deserves like this public shaming, and you got to dump her, blah, blah, blah. And for an outsider, you look at this and you think, yeah, this woman is just problem city. But if you're familiar with abuse, you see this and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy staged this whole thing to kind of poke, to intentionally capture her exploding on camera, and then doing all of this to humiliate her. I'm not saying that her behavior was okay, but her behavior was very common, overreactive type behavior to a person her behavior was very common and normal for somebody who's been experiencing psychological abuse for a long period of time. So that disturbing. Yeah, Kelly says trying to understand malignant cluster Bs is walking into the devil's workshop, and explaining it to friends was exhausting, as I was often seen as over the top. Yes. Yes, it's it's difficult to explain. It's difficult to explain that to people who haven't lived it. It just seems, it just doesn't seem real. That's interesting. Gigi is saying parental alienation syndrome has been scientifically debunked. I would be curious to see any articles on that, because I have seen it time and time and time again. It's very I mean, it's part of it. When you've got it, when you have a significant other who has a pathological worldview, and they always think that they're either right or they're the victim. And if their target leaves them, then it's very common for them to say, to work, oh, I'm just going to say your mother, or whoever, your father, whoever, your mother, she left me, she's manipulative, she's abusive, she tore this family apart. And it doesn't even have to be these major comments. It can just be subtle things. Well, you know what? I'd really love to take you to Disney World, but I can't because I have to pay your mother child support. Or, your mom is, she's the one that's tearing this family apart. I wanted us to stay together because families stay together. Little not so subtle comments like that. And it only takes once, really, but it can really just erode the relationship between the parent-child relationship. And of course, the other parent, especially if they're not with their child and they don't hear what's going on, and then all of a sudden their child comes home, they're angry, they're defiant, they want nothing to do with them, they're standoffish, there's these behavior changes, and they don't realize why. And they might think, oh, I guess it's just because, we got a divorce, they're going through a lot. And it's oftentimes not. It's that this child's being subtly manipulated by the other parent because they're turning them against the other parent. And that kind of stuff, once it starts up, it's just so poisonous and so difficult to undo. There was a fantastic book that we read for book club a while back on it called Divorce Poison. And he just, I forget who the author is, Richard Warshaw or something like that. Fantastic book. If you want to learn more about parental alienation, I highly recommend it. He talks about kind of really getting clear about what it is, the different ways it can happen, how to work towards disabling it, and how family can help as well. And so some of the things that he had said with family was letting the child know that they are loved and accepted, that they don't have to choose sides, and that their grandma's house or grandpa's house is that your relationship, a grandma or grandpa's relationship with the child is their relationship. And the whole goal is to keep communication open and to keep a healthy relationship with that child. And in order to kind of try to combat that manipulation, because once that child starts to pull back and sees the other parent as kind of the cause of all of their problems, they oftentimes start shutting off other family members because of that. So great. It was just a really great book. Frankly, I kind of think anybody that's going through a divorce should read it, because some of this stuff isn't just, unique to narcissists or like malignant people. Sometimes even well-intended, kind of healthy, balanced people that are hurt can say some things and not realize the impact that it can have on a child. Yeah, and Gigi says, yes, that is my concern too. How is it being applied? Okay, yeah. So Gigi says, how can it be a diagnosis as a disease? Also, it is a manipulation tool of the unhealthy parent. So who would be diagnosed? The problem parent, the victim parent, or the child? That's a really great question. The only thing I can think of is as far as it being considered a disease, it would and I could be completely off base here, so correct me if I am, would be that there's kind of this disease model of kind of understanding, I don't know, problematic behavior, I guess. So for example, alcoholism, like the disease model for understanding alcoholism. The American Medical Association in like, what was it, the mid 50s or so came out and said, okay, they considered alcoholism a disease. And the reason they considered it a disease is because it was a disease-like process. So there were certain symptoms, there was a certain progression. If it got progressively worse without treatment, and it could potentially lead to death. So that was why it was classified as a disease and not just, not just seen as, well, and I guess too, before that, alcoholism was seen as more of like a moral failure or a kind of lack of willpower. And so then it shifted into, no, it's actually like this disease process. But I think you can make that argument, disease process, for any type of problematic behavior, not just alcoholism, not just manipulation. PMLD refers to codependency the same way. And I agree with her completely. This is something I had thought about for a very long time, of if this imbalance is not restored with a person who's more on that codependent side of the spectrum, or more on the kind of others-centered side of the spectrum, this will lead to death, because there's that inability to be self-protective. And if a person is lacking that, they're going to continue. If a person has an inability to protect themselves and they don't know when they're being mistreated, because they keep glossing over red flags, they keep giving other people the benefit of the doubt, and they are either terrified of being alone, or they only feel love. They only feel important and loved if they're getting it from other people, generally a significant other. They're going to continue to get caught up in problematic relationship after problematic relationship until they either lose themselves in addiction, until their partner kills them, or or driven to suicide. Like, it does not end well. Like, there has to be this resolution, this balance has to be restored. So I don't know. I'd be curious to know if that was kind of the thought process behind seeing parental alienation as that process, the progressive process. Gigi. She says, just FYI, compulsive sexual behavior is in the ICD-11. Yes. And compulsive sexual behavior is a very real thing. I'm just saying, I think it's, again, my 2 cents on it. There's compulsive sexual behavior that can be the result of, let's say, like mania, the chemical imbalances that can contribute to it. When a person has compulsive sexual behavior, when they are a compulsive cheater, to me, that is more of a character issue. I know that might not be a popular thing. I think you can have a sex addiction and not chronically cheat on your partner. So there's a line. Just like you can have an alcohol addiction or a drug addiction and not, take it to such a level that you've stolen everything from, family and friends. And I don't know. Even people like an extreme addiction still have some sort of like limits for their behavior. I know that some people can go so far over them, but they're still generally if they do go so far over them, they're aware of it. Versus more of like that sociopathic, like chronic cheating kind of stuff, that tends to be just more because they're bored and they just, and sex is fun. And it boosts their ego. That's my 2 cents. Okay, let me scroll up here. That's a good question. I don't know, Gigi. I'd be curious to find out. I'm going to look into this for next week, because now this is all new. This is all news to me. She says, well, why wouldn't parental alienation be diagnosed as depression, anxiety, etc., which results of being in the middle of parental alienation? Well, I think your question earlier about, okay, well, who is this the diagnosis being applied to? Because is it the person doing the alienating? Is it the person? Is it the child? Is it the person being alienated? Is it who? Because it's yeah. So I don't know. My guess is that a lot of times, my guess is that there'll be multiple diagnoses that go along with it if they're kind of still putting the pieces together. So my guess would be, if depending on the child's age and if they're becoming behavioral, that the child would probably start being considered for like different conduct disorders or different attachment disorders, or possibly even being treated for trauma, depending on what was all involved with the divorce, if there was any abuse involved. Manipulation is a very difficult thing for a lot of people to see. So I could imagine that it would take a while for people to really put the pieces together. I would imagine too that the spouse that's been alienated would probably start seeking out treatment for depression, anxiety, insomnia, all kinds of, whenever we have an issue, stress is so underrated and it just comes out in so many different ways. So it's very rare, if a person's undergoing stress, it's very rare that it just comes out in like one way, that, okay, we're just having anxiety. It knocks all of us just really off balance, and it takes a bit to get that balance to return. And that's if we know what we're dealing with. When we had the house fire, it was sort of like, okay, yeah, that was profoundly stressful, but there was clarity. Like, yes, this is why this is stressful. These are the things that need to get back into balance. Versus if you've got a person in an abusive relationship or that's recently out of one, they may or may not realize that there was abuse. Even if they do realize it, odds are they don't realize the extent of it. And they haven't even begun to look at the emotional or psychological parts of it. And so a lot of, chronic pain, inflammation, headaches, high blood pressure, getting too much sleep, too little sleep, eating too much, not eating enough, wanting to isolate, hair loss, breaking out in hives, feeling distrustful of others, inability to focus. There was a class I went to years ago when I was working at a domestic violence shelter, and the speaker this was, you have in life, like there's just, there are these certain moments that are just kind of these light bulb moments where that just kind of lead you down this different path. And this was one of them for me. So this woman it was a conference on trauma and basically as it pertained, well, the focus was on Native Americans because I lived in New Mexico. And so that was a large, group that we worked with. So kind of just understanding more of like the culture and everything that was involved. And so this one woman started speaking about it, and she had said, and this was, 10 plus years ago, that what she was saying is she really felt that ADD was misdiagnosed trauma. And that she really wondered how many of these children that were being treated for ADD, that their trauma was being misdiagnosed. So like, okay, well, their, inability, it's all of trauma symptoms, right? So, well, a lot of them, like inability to focus, their kind of energy, it can be off the charts, impulsive, reactive, these kinds of things. So it can be difficult to kind of tell, like, well, what are we dealing with? Does this child really have ADD, or is this trauma, or is it both, or what? Okay, James is taking off. He says, good night. Past his bedtime. See you, James. I'll see you soon. And just FYI, everybody, James also has his own channel on narcissistic abuse. His channel name is called James the Broviver. I haven't been over there in a little bit, so I haven't seen what all he's been up to, but he's a good guy. He's on one of our book club people. So check him out. Yes, Kelly says, good night, James. I like how chill you are. Yeah, James is mega chill. That is a great way to describe him. Okay, I will. James says, Dana, you got to check it out, yo. LOL. I will. Things happen quickly in internet land, especially on here on YouTube. Okay, let's see here. Jennifer says, I've heard that CPTSD symptoms can manifest as migraines. Is it possible that they can manifest as seizures? I've never had a seizure, but my doctor wants me to see a neurologist. Did your doctor say why he wants you to see a neurologist? He or she wants you to see a neurologist? All kinds of health disorders, health issues can be sparked by stress. I mean, the human body is such a complex thing, and it's amazing that it's able to maintain itself, but it's also really amazing how easily it can get knocked off balance. And stress is one of them. I mean, it just can exacerbate so many things. Like I said, any inflammatory disorder, lupus, multiple sclerosis, arthritis, fibromyalgia, is stress does not help with that at all. It makes things a lot worse. A person can even develop like an arrhythmia, a heart arrhythmia, and sometimes that can resolve on its own after the stress passes. It's just lots of different things. Yep. Tammy was saying, she said, I think my 3 cancers are because of abuse and parental alienation. Yeah, and I think there is a strong correlation between, certain types of like gene mutations and cell mutations and stress. That stress can contribute to turning different genes and cells on and off. I had a friend of mine who we were nurses together, both psychiatric nurses, and she had developed I forget, pretty severe stage 2 or 3, maybe it was stage 3 cancer, breast cancer and uterine cancer. And when she came back after her first appointment, she had said she found it so interesting that one of the questions that her doctor had asked her was, basically, what kind of stress did she have in her life? And was she holding on to any anger or resentment? And she just found that, like, what does this have to do with anything? But that, yeah, it was, it doesn't help us heal when there's, we have all that stuff inside of us. Okay, Misty, that is a great question. She says, how do we gauge or know if we're making progress in our healing? That's a very big question. And for everybody, it's going to be a little different. For some people, when they talk, and the word healing, I guess, is kind of also this kind of nebulous word, and it means something different to each and every person. So when some people say, how do I know if I'm healing? What they're referring to is how do I know that I'm really actually moving through this complex post-traumatic stress disorder? Or how do I, by healing, like, well, how do I know when I'm not going to feel so emotionally devastated? Or when am I going to be able to trust again? Or when am I going to stop feeling so isolated? Or kind of, when am I going to be ready to date again? These kinds of things. And so kind of healing, the word healing tends to mean different things to different people, which is why it's kind of a big question. But I would say in general, some of the top, I really need to put together like a video series on this. There's a couple of main points that I think tend to be kind of universal for most people when they talk about healing. Like, this is kind of what they mean, and it tends to mean their concerns about trust. How do I go about trusting other people again? How do I move past this fear that I'm attracting these people, or that move past this fear of being hurt? How can I tell kind of an unsafe person from a safe person? When can I start reconnecting? When will I start feeling like a sexual person again, or a sensual person again? How do I know if I'm ready to date? There tends to be, like, these tend to be the main questions. So let me just kind of run through those. I'm going to keep the chat going in case anybody wants to clarify on that. But Gigi saying, yeah, healing, trusting your instincts, moving from victimized to survivor. I really feel that a lot of this starts with learning, reconnecting with our ability to trust. But what this often means, I would say like 99.99% of the time, is learning to go about building trust in a very different way. Because the way that we tend to be kind of I don't know, I would say culturally indoctrinated into building trust is most of us tend to go through life thinking like, well, I'm just going to take other people at face value and I'm going to see the good in other people. I'm going to assume that this is a safe, secure world, and until I'm proven otherwise. And that's a problem because we don't live in a safe and secure world. So, and this is kind of something that kind of bothers me, because that's kind of the kind of standard mental health model of that we just, that we believe that, we live in this kind of fair and just world, and that the world is a relatively safe place. And to me, that's insane, because no, it's not. And that doesn't mean that I am just hyper vigilant because of my experiences. I mean it because it's true. So that's I have my own kind of axe to grind with that. But so learning to trust in a very different way, and having a healthy degree of skepticism. So it's not that we need to walk around feeling like everybody's out to get us, or to have kind of this like neurotic approach to life. It's realizing, kind of approaching when we're meeting other people, just realizing I don't know you. So there's the sense of neutrality. So I might take kind of surface level conversation for face value, but it's anything that we do has to always be in that context of healthy boundaries. So yeah, I might, if you tell me that that you lived with your grandmother until you were 10 years old, or that your favorite food is Italian, I might take that kind of stuff at face value, but I'm not going to trust you to the point where I'm, letting you know where I live, or, jumping in your car to caravan to some other place, you know what I mean? Or stuff like that. So there's kind of these limits about trust, like, and trust is something that it's earned with appropriate behavior over a consistent period of time. It's not just blindly given. I think the trust thing is what trips up so many survivors, is because other people who still are walking around thinking that the world is a primarily a good, safe place, they don't understand that it's not. And to view the world as it's kind of a neutral place, like there's good and there's bad out there, and you don't know. So, I guess too, for me, coming from a medical background, our whole approach to things is it's always erring on the side of caution, and it's always a healthy degree of skepticism. That's why we have universal precautions. That's why you wear gloves when you touch when you're a nurse, you're giving shots, you're cleaning up body fluids. The odds of that being infected are slim to none, but why risk it? Right? Like, you have to err on the side of caution. So from my background, it's always err on the side of caution, healthy degree of skepticism, right? Like, it doesn't seem to be a thing with a lot of the rest of the world, which is bizarre to me. But so yeah, I guess anyways, the point being, learning how to trust appropriately, build trust with another person. It just takes time. It takes seeing appropriate behavior and seeing how they respond. When you start opening up to them, how do they respond to that? Are they using it against you? Are they teasing you? Or are they making light of something that's serious? Are they showing through their actions that they're emotionally safe? Are they are they acting in ways that are trustworthy? How are you feeling? Do you know? This is a big one, because I don't think most people know this. Do you know when you're being treated in a way that's not okay with you? Because most people don't, not just abuse survivors, most people in general. Because again, socially, we are, from a very young age, are taught to kind of do what's polite, regardless of how we feel. And so at a young age, we get separated from that. So we don't know, a lot of us don't know what we like and what we don't like. because we've been told since we were children, oh, you fall down and scrape your knee. Oh, you're fine. You're not hurt. Well, no, actually you are hurt. Oh, the neighbor creeps you out. Well, go over there and give them a hug. They're fine. You're being shy. You're being silly. It's, like these little things kind of erode a person's confidence in themselves. And then later on in life, how many ladies out there are uncomfortable with, you see somebody walking towards your car and you're stopped at a red light and somebody's walking in it, you get creeped out and you don't want to lock the door because you don't want to be seen as rude. These kinds of things, these little tiny ways that we just don't feel comfortable being self-protective. It's a problem. So, that's a big one. Julie, let's talk about that here in a second. But yeah, so understanding when you're being, not even when you're being abused, not even when you're being mistreated, when you're experiencing something that you're not comfortable with, to be able to be in tune with that. If you're in a parking lot and you hear footsteps behind you, that should make you uneasy. Okay? Because we don't know. We don't know what else is going on. But if somebody's coming up quickly behind us, it's normal to be like, well, yikes, what's going on? So to realize, you know what, that doesn't make me comfortable. So I need to take some sort of different action. Maybe you kind of cut across the parking lot. Maybe you grab your keys. Maybe you grab your mace. Maybe you grab your cell phone. We do something different instead of just hoping that it's nothing, or fearing or not wanting to take action because we're afraid of overreacting. That kind of inaction is what tends to get us kind of deeper into these problematic situations. So knowing when you're being treated in a way that you are not okay with, how to respond to that, either taking different action or being assertive, getting physical distance or being assertive. Knowing how to build appropriate trust with somebody, realizing that you have the power to walk away. If you're in, I think so many survivors, they fear, with an abusive relationship, they're like, man, I got dragged through hell last time. I don't think I could go through that again. Like that would kill me. I can't do that. And they're so fearful to get out there and start interacting with other people or dating again because they're so understandably so terrified of that. But what they don't realize is if they're able to reclaim their power and realize you set the pace, you are in charge of this, you can get up and leave anytime you want, that you don't have to stay with this person. If there's a bunch of uncomfortable behavior on their end, if things feel off, if it's unsettling, if there's abuse, any of that kicks up, you can leave. You don't need to stay in it for 10 years or 10 months like you did last time. So kind of understanding, the power that you do have. Also, I think a big part of understanding healing is understanding what healing is and what healing isn't. Healing isn't going back to who you were before, because life is always about growth. It's never about going backwards. And so a lot of people kind of walk around feeling profoundly broken because they're like, well, geez, if we're sitting there waiting to go back to the way we were, we're going to be sitting there for the rest of our life, because life's never about that, never about going backwards. But that doesn't mean that we have to be profoundly broken and stay profoundly broken going forwards. It just means that we need to start working towards building a new normal. And our new normal doesn't have to be kind of just this, taped together, broken, second-rate level of normal. It doesn't have to be like that. Our new normal can actually be even better than it was before, because that's the beauty of having your life blown apart, is now you can start consciously going about examining every single piece that you're going to rebuild with, and you just questioning everything. How do you feel about commitment and friendship and love, and what is healthy for you? What is unhealthy? What is toxic? What is nourishing? Who are you? What kind of hobbies do you want to have? What kind of person do you want to be? What do you want this next chapter in your life to look like? So like healing and finding that new normal doesn't have to be a depressing thing. It can be a really exciting, awesome, game-changing, life-changing thing. Yes. And Gigi says, one thing that she's noticed is that she feels confused whenever she is being mistreated. That is a red flag for her. Yes, confusion is such an important signal. And it's a big one when there's mistreatment going on. So yeah, it's a big sign. We're slowing down. Here's the other thing too, because somebody had asked in the support group the other day about, kind of like, how can you tell the difference between red flags and hypervigilance? And my experience with this, again, personally and with the support group and everything I do, is that the more clarity we have, like the more vocabulary and understanding you have for what problematic behavior is, the less kind of nebulous these red flags seem. So it tends to only seem confusing, and it can feel kind of crazy making and overreactive if we don't have the words for it. But when you have, and it's difficult to explain your experience to somebody because this is such wild stuff. And if we're struggling it's because it's unlike anything that we normally experience. We don't have, this is the vocabulary that surrounds us is not normal in a normal kind of quote unquote normal person's working vocabulary. So understanding terms like projection, triangulation, hoovering, flying monkeys, smear campaign, love bombing, the cycle of abuse, idealize, devalue, discard, future faking, stonewalling, silent treatment, withholding. There's so much terminology behind this. And even like the terminology for us, like rebuilding our life into something positive, we might have heard certain terms, but we really don't have a very solid working understanding of them. So like people, inner child or healthy boundaries or standards or deal breakers or, a lot of forgiveness. We're talking about forgiveness in the chat. Like a lot of these terms, there's these inaccurate, a lot of inaccurate understandings of these terms. And this is why people kind of get stuck time and time again, is because they're not taking any of these terms, well, the healthy, quote unquote, healthy, like love, commitment, friendship, forgiveness, this kind of boundaries within the context of healthy boundaries. So a lot of this stuff, when you've got a manipulator involved in the mix, everything changes. Every understanding of like love, commitment, forgiveness, friendship, you name it, is radically altered. So the normal understandings of quote unquote normal people don't apply. So we have to make sure that we are filtering any incoming advice in through that context of healthy boundaries and standards and deal breakers. And so it's really important for people to understand what healthy boundaries are and aren't. And there's just so many challenges for a person to really rebuild their life into something healthy, because society's not healthy. And so, you can start moving along trying to build boundaries. And then next thing you know, you got the whole peanut gallery arguing with you saying, oh, well, you're going about it wrong. And what about grace? What about compassion? What about forgiveness? And for a person who's already struggling with validating themselves and their perception of reality, any little comment like that can just completely derail them. So, and I need to do videos. I know I keep talking about that. I really do just need to do it. But my first book, if you are new to this topic and the terminology and all of this, my first book, it's called Start Here. You can find it on Amazon, Dana Morningstar. You can find all my books. That book it's a crash course to understanding this. It has pretty much all of the terminology. There's like at least probably 50 different words in there that are important, that'll help to be able to clarify all of this. There's frequently asked questions in there. There's just quite a bit in that book, but that'll get a person really up and running quickly with understanding this kind of stuff. And then my second book, Out of the Fog, takes a lot of the concepts from the first book, and it compares and contrasts them. So the first book, for example, explains like trauma bonds. And then the second book then compares and contrasts like trauma bonds versus healthy bonds. So the first book explains love bombing. The second book explains the difference between love bombing and love. So the second book compares and contrasts, I don't know, like 50 different commonly confused concepts. It's the difference between a parent and a predator, the difference between kind of commitment and codependency, on and on and on. So and Julie was saying here, she says, "Oh, Dana, I've heard this, that I have not forgiven my abuser because I'm still angry. Newsflash, forgiving my abuser didn't erase what they did. Until it does, I'm still going to feel mad." Yes, I know. It enrages me when people say stuff like that. It is so damn insensitive and just invalidating. And it just, it just makes me want to just physically charge people that say that and tackle them to the floor. Because it's like, oh my gosh, if you only knew how hurtful telling somebody who's been so victimized something like that is, just such a jerk face move, Yes. And I think we've all heard some variation of that. Here's how I tend to handle that. So when somebody says, well, you really need to forgive. If I'm in a good mood and I've eaten, okay, let me just preface this. My blood sugar is stable and I don't become, just a snarky jerk face. Okay. If I am having a good moment, if somebody comes at me like that, I will say, you know what? If by forgiveness, you mean that I need to work towards releasing anger, then yes, this is what I am working towards doing. It's not an event, it's a process. And this is a personal journey that I am on. But I just don't even like that word at all. I just think it is so abused and misused and twisted up. It's not even funny. It's just so off the mark, and no wonder people get hung up with that, right? Because to say, oh yes, I forgive my abuser, normally the normal context for forgiveness means kind of this releasing of a grudge, right? Like this kind of making of amends. But sometimes people do things that are so egregious that they can say that they're sorry. And we don't need to accept that. Like, I don't care if you're sorry. What you've done is so outrageous. I never want to see you or talk to you ever again. Stay out of my life. But it's even, like if you don't even get that acknowledgement of wrongdoing, then the thought of even letting that person back into your life is just asinine. That just is ridiculous. So I'm always very clear. Like when I talk about forgiveness, it's synonymous with releasing anger. It has nothing to do with getting an apology from another person. So I basically have constructed my own like meaning around it. And so I just set people straight when they come at me with that of no. And because some people too will be like, well, um, it's the moral thing, it's the Christian thing, it's the emotionally, whatever, enlightened thing to just forgive. Well, I'll tell you, the people that say that kind of stuff have never had anything really egregious happen to them. And here's the thing too, the ones that have, there's a term, it's called bypassing. And it's something to just kind of watch out for in general. But what a lot of people do is they don't know what to do with this pain. And so they hear all the time, oh, if you forgive this other person, then this will help. This will help the pain. It'll help you heal. But because like there's no guidance to that or like a healthy understanding of forgiveness, they just say the words. Like, okay, I'm going to forgive this person, hoping that that gets them out of their pain. And really, they're just saying words, because true forgiveness, it's working towards releasing that anger. And this isn't something like we were talking about earlier. It's not something that you don't just get over this. You have to get through it, and you have to feel all of these feelings. And it's going to be a whole mix of feelings of anger, of sadness, of rage, of acceptance, of denial, of all of these things. And it's a process. And for many people, it takes, many, many, many years. It's the same thing with compassion. I hear all the time, oh, you got to have compassion for them. There's these deeply wounded, baby birds with a broken wing. And what about compassion for the abuser? And, my stance on this kind of stuff is I am much more concerned about victims finding compassion for themselves. First and foremost, I think to have compassion for your abuser before you have compassion for yourself is a problem. So we need to have compassion for ourselves. We need to be able to forgive ourselves, for not seeing their behavior, for staying, for being manipulated. Not that it was our fault. I mean, we all did the best we could. This stuff can happen to anybody. It really can. But like, we can get so angry, that shame, that guilt, that embarrassment, realizing, treating ourselves with self-compassion and with forgiveness and kindness, and being like, you know what, had you known that this person was sociopathic, or you wouldn't have stayed with them. But you just did the best you could. So, yeah. Yes, Ricky says, I need to sit down and have a long talk with my inner child. Were you here, Ricky, for the club book we read called The Tao of Fully Feeling by Pete Walker? It was a fantastic book. And I think that's a good place. It's a good place, I think, for anybody to start when you're kind of trying to figure out like what does this mean? Like, how do I reconnect with my emotions? What does that look like? Pete Walker really does a great job of spelling this out. And he has his own process that, I forget, there's like 4 or 5 steps in it where he talks about that. So that's been the only book I've come across. And we do a book a month, and we have for 4 years now, not to mention everything else I've read up until that point. That's been the only book that I've come across that really does a great job of truly spelling out, getting what it means to really get in touch with your feelings. Jack says, hey, Grace, did Dana get to your question? Because I think it really does relate to the issues I'm having right now as well. I don't think I did. Let me scroll up and see if I can find it. Grace, 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 Grace. Where are you? Yeah, Gareth was saying that he loves Taoism. He loves the I Ching. Yes, that book is fantastic. Talk about a very powerful, um, powerful little book. So much wisdom in so few pages. Okay, I'm still scrolling. Grace, where's your question? I can't find you. Ah. Okay, now I'm curious. What is going on in the chat? There's Julie. Are you and Jack a couple? Am I getting this right? I need context. This is I think if that oh, I think you are. Julie says he's my one true love. I am curious. I think that's so cool that you guys are both here. I think you might be the first couple that have found their way here, that have both been through something like this. I am still scrolling up. Grace, if you are still here, I do not see your question. Oh, very cool. Jack says, yes, Julie is my wife. And Julie says, yes, he is my husband. Oh, that's so cute. That's just so cool. What a cool thing for both of you guys to be able to just share in this. That's so cool. Let's see here. Oh, Kelly was saying that people have told her over the years that she needs to read The Art of War. And who was it? Gareth was saying, yeah, that's a good book. There's another book, and I'm drawing a blank on his name right now. Stephen Pressfield, I believe. It's called The War of Art. And that's a fantastic book. And it's about the struggles of the creative person and like the creative process. So if you're creative, I highly recommend that book. It's fantastic. Okay, Grace, I think this was her question from before. She says, yes, how do I best support my 16-year-old while she is recognizing these toxic behaviors in her father? This can be kind of a difficult line to walk because even though she's seeing problematic stuff in her dad, it's still her dad, and she's most likely, it's sort of one of those things like it's one thing for her to be upset with him, but if anybody else is, then she's going to get defensive. So not that you would, want to trash talk him or anything to her, but it's just realizing that it's a line. It's definitely a tightrope sometimes. So I would just say validating, staying kind of very neutral about it. So if she's saying, oh, geez, I can't believe, dad let me down again. He said he was going to help out and pay for, half my soccer lessons and he didn't, or he said he was going to be at my school play and he didn't show up again, or he said we were going to go camping but we're not. These kinds of things, to just validate that and just say, I am so sorry, honey. That's really hurtful. Yeah, you're right. You have every right to be upset by that. That's really, I don't blame you for being upset. I don't blame you for being hurt. Yes, that's very disappointing. And just kind of validating that. So we don't have to, that kind of stuff, like we can't fix it. And there's not a lot we can really do to control it, especially if there's shared custody and this kind of thing. Sometimes, and that she might be even at the age where kind of talking about kind of like in a roundabout way of just limitations of certain people that, some people, I don't know. When I was about her age is when I started realizing with my own relationship with my father that people were different, that how like my 100% loving somebody and his 100% were very different. And that my 15 or 20% was his 100%. And kind of once I realized that not everybody has the same, kind of same depth of emotions or not everybody's like you, basically. Like, because we all kind of walk around as our baseline for normal. If we are, if we make our bed every day, we kind of think that other people do that. And if they don't do that, then we think they're weird, right? If other drivers, anybody that drives faster than us is a maniac, and anybody who drives slower than us is just a frustrating grandma. And kind of realizing that other people are different. They're different in a lot of different ways. And it's unfortunate that, sometimes, people say things and they don't mean them. So they make promises and then they can't carry them out. And so kind of helping, I think as her parent, kind of anticipating that. So if there's a pattern of he promises to pay for half of the cost of soccer lessons, but he continually doesn't follow through with that, kind of planning ahead financially. So then your daughter's not paying the price and realizing, yeah, it sure would be great. Like kind of thinking to yourself, oh, it would be great if this year he actually did come through, but I'm not holding my breath because the past 8 years he hasn't. So I'm just going to start saving for it now so I'm not caught off guard and so she can still play. And if he pays, then great. But if he doesn't, I'm not going to be surprised by it. And, just validating her whenever she's having issues. Okay, let's see. Let's see, Miss Marabella is talking about with her situation that there were times where she'd be at his house and randomly her gut would tell her to leave immediately, to just get out of there. And she's never had that happen before with someone, this need to just leave and get out of there. And that she wished she'd listened to it, but she chalked it up to a general fear of commitment that she needed to get over. And I will tell you something, Miss Marabella, that is so common. That is more common than not, because in large part, we're not taught to understand our different emotions. We're not taught to understand what they are to begin with, but we're also not taught to see them as a key way of interacting with our environment. There's kind of this thought of, oh, emotions are just kind of this kind of fluffy, hippie woo-woo, touchy, feel good kind of a thing, but they're not. It's data. It's really important information. that helps us navigate our environment. This is one of the challenges. This is why people struggle with getting in tune with knowing when they're being treated in a way that they're not okay with, because why would you do anything different? This is not discussed. So instead, we default to what society tells us is to basically give other people the benefit of the doubt. And if we don't have that concrete proof that there's a problem, then we're overreacting. So that's a problem. And so here's the thing with that can help. I think maybe make gut feelings make more sense, because it seems like, oh, it's just intuition, right? It's like this kind of mystical, fluffy kind of thing. And it's not. So if you think about the human brain, okay, let me just back up here. Our brain has gone through every single stage of evolution. It's just fascinating when you think of it like this. So we think of our brain as having one brain, like it's just one hunk of jello up there. It's not. It's actually a series of 3 brains that have evolved over time. So we have kind of the base part of our brain, which is also known as our lizard brain, and that controls a lot of the kind of base functions, heart rate, respirations. It also kicks off like fight, flight, or different defense mechanisms, these kinds of things. This is the part of the brain that we have in common with reptiles. We all have this. Then there's the part of our brain, the next layer. Oh, okay. Thank you for the Livestream donation. She says, yes, my father was a lawyer where logic prevailed over feelings. And so everything had to be substantiated with evidence and proof. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to give you some really interesting logical way to understand what we call intuition. And this can be an absolute game changer. So once you understand it this way, you'll give a lot more credit to these feelings when they surface. But again, nobody does, like until they have this understanding, frankly, because it's just too easy. It's too easy to gloss over them and to think, oh boy, we're just, I've got issues with commitment. I've got issues with men. I've got issues with the trust. It's nothing, right? So anyway, so we have this reptile brain. Then the next layer of our brain is our limbic system, or what's known as like our mammalian brain. And it's the part of the brain that we have in common with all other mammals. And this part of our brain, this is so cool. The body is just the coolest thing ever. This part of our brain is connected via our vagus nerve. So it's your vagus nerve runs from your brainstem down to your rectum, and it touches almost every single organ along the way. So each part of our brain communicates with us in a different way. So then the third part, the newest part of our brain is the prefrontal cortex. This is what we know as like the human brain. This is the logic and critical thinking, rational thought, behavior, control, behavior regulation, these kinds of things, personality. This is all part of that prefrontal cortex. However, thank you, Kelly, for the Livestream donation. So when we come across information, because we're not taught about how these different parts of our brain and how our brain processes information, we all tend to think, well, we all process information through the logic and critical thinking part of our brain, because we're humans and that's what we do. We're logical, rational creatures, and we are wrong. Our brain does not process information that way. It processes information basically from the bottom up, not from the top down. So the oldest parts of our brain are picking up on millions of bits of information a second, way more than the logic and critical thinking part of our brain can process. And the stuff that the reptile part of our brain and the mammalian part of our brain are picking up, it's subtle things. Think about what animals pick up on. It's sometimes it's a little noise. It's sometimes with other people, it's certain movements, certain things that register as off, but we might not be able to pinpoint why. It might be the way a person's looking at us, the way that they smile, the way that they phrased something. It's these little subtle things that that make it seem like we're overreacting, because it's oftentimes subtle. But if we're getting that our spidey sense is going off, it's generally because these older, more skilled parts of our brain are picking up on, hey, something's not right here. And so, but by the time that information, that's the spidey sense goes off and we're like, hey, something's not right, then that human part of our brain starts to try to figure out, well, what does this mean? And it starts to try to make sense of it. But if it doesn't, so like I was talking about earlier, if you don't have the vocabulary for this, if you don't have the understanding of this, then we're kind of fumbling around trying to make sense of it. And so this is where we tend to gloss over it, because we can't pinpoint it. We just know that it feels off, but it feels overreactive if we just take action based on something feeling off. But this is what I was saying earlier. It's important that we err on the side of caution. So let me give you another example. So people in the medical background, for us, any little thing that's off is a potential big deal. And again, the rest of the world doesn't view things like this. So if a person comes in and they are having arm pain, they're sweating, they are having a hard time talking, they have a sudden personality changes, they have a headache, they, any little thing is out of the ordinary, it should be taken seriously. And then there's this process of, okay, let's start ruling stuff out. And we tend to go from, okay, what is the worst thing this could be? So let's be as proactive as possible and then start ruling it out. So if a person comes in, and normal people, it's easy to gloss over. Oh, well, that person's sweating. Well, maybe they're sweating profusely. Well, maybe it's just a hot day. Oh, well, their arm hurts. Maybe it's because they were outside raking leaves. Oh, well, they have acid reflux. Well, maybe it's because they were eating a bunch of salsa earlier. And maybe that is the case, but maybe it's not. And so this is when, for EMTs, first responders, people in medical community, they'll start kind of figuring out, okay, what is this? Is this a heart attack? Or is this just a guy who ate some salsa and doesn't feel good? And figuring it out. But in terms of day-to-day situations like this with other people, if we're feeling like something's off, those feelings are there for a reason. Actually, back to the medical thing, interestingly enough, one of the symptoms of a person having a heart attack, one of the biggest symptoms is they have an impending sense of doom. That's literally what it's referred to as, an impending sense of doom, because somewhere deep in their body, things are not going right, but it hasn't registered. They haven't gone into having a full-blown heart attack yet. But these things, these signs that something are off, they're there for a reason, and we don't tend to experience them, and we don't tend to get a false positive too often, if ever, frankly. So this is why just erring on the side of caution, realizing if you're feeling this way, and here's a way that you can kind of gut check yourself, is if you're asking yourself, do you normally feel this way? Odds are you don't. And like you were saying, that you'd never felt that feeling of, oh my God, I'm in major danger. If you don't normally feel this way, or if you've only ever felt this way around other really bad situations, that's a sign it's just time to go. You don't need to sit there and figure out if you're in danger. It's time to just go get some physical distance from that person. And here was the big lesson for me, and I think for a lot of people, is that it's getting rid of that need of concrete proof. So I had a gal tell me, I started all of this. I'd been in 2 really horrific relationships over a span of about 7 or so years. And then I had just started dating this guy. We'd gone on a couple dates, and I just had that dark feeling of I'm in danger. And I'd only experienced that really with one other person before in my life. And but I kept thinking like, well, I don't have any valid reason to break up with him. He's never done anything. I just have this really dark feeling. And anyways, long story short, so this gal had told me, she said, you know, Dana, you don't need to just sit there. Like, what you're experiencing is uncomfortable, basically. You don't need to sit there and you know how this movie ends. You don't need to sit there and watch it all the way through before you get up and leave. Meaning, you don't like what you're experiencing right now. You don't need to you don't need to spend years and years waiting for it to get worse and worse in order to leave. If what you're experiencing is uncomfortable, especially if it's terrifying on like that level, that's concrete proof enough. Because any dynamic that's worth your safety, that's kind of risking your safety or sanity, or impacting your safety or sanity, it's not worth being in, period, end of story. So yeah, so these little subtle things that are off, these are oftentimes the early warning signs. It's just we're never taught to understand them like that. And because of that, it can seem like, and that's what's so hard, is to stay really grounded in what's right for you, because it's very, very easy to get tangled up in well-intended bad advice from other people that will try to convince you, oh, you have issues with men, you've got issues with commitment, you've got issues with your father, you're hypervigilant, it's your PTSD, all of this. But this is why it can help to go back to, you know what, think about how you feel around safe people. If you have a close friend, a trusted sibling, somebody that you feel comfortable around, you feel safe and secure. It doesn't feel unsettling. Because, and 2, when these things are unsettling, it's a series of stuff that's just off. There was a gal here on YouTube who'd posted a video where she went for a job interview, and her video was like, I think I was going to get sold into sex trafficking. Like, she went for this job interview. Nothing about it was legit. Like, she gets there, it was in an abandoned strip mall. The lights were off. The building was locked. There was mail piled up on the floor. Like, all the stuff that anybody could excuse. Oh, they hadn't been there in a while. There was a recession. It was this, it was that. The guy comes in. He was friendly enough. She gets a weird vibe. He leads her to the back room. She gets a weird vibe. He sits in a chair where he's kind of like blocking the door. She can't really easily leave. Again, gets a weird vibe. All stuff that any one of us could justify, right? He gets up to go to the bath or take a phone call, and she just realizes, if I don't leave now, I'm going to get kidnapped. Something's going to happen to me because I have this terrible feeling. And so she ends up leaving, and she's shaking, and, drives a few blocks and calls her boyfriend and is terrified. And she's like, I don't know. I don't have that concrete proof that, yes, this was in fact, some sort of like, a sex trafficking operation or what. She's like, but I just had this feeling that I was going to get hurt if I stayed there. But we can struggle with taking action on that because we can feel foolish if we're wrong. If anybody else is interested in this kind of stuff, a fantastic book on this topic that can help you feel more at ease with understanding all of this. It's kind there's some graphic parts in it, so kind of just trigger warning. But it's a book called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, and it's fantastic. And he talks about that the gift of fear is that it alerts us to danger, and it's not an emotion that's found in healthy situations. Rob, Gavin de Becker, Becker, I believe. Sam. Rob says, hey, any updates on women narcissists being capable of fatal violence towards a male victim? Hands down, they can be. I think women are just as violent as men. The only thing is they go about it in different ways, because there tends to be, a strength and size difference. But yeah, so if there's any concerns that somebody's going to hurt you, I just would steer clear. My guess would be that the statistics tend to report. I just don't know how much of that stuff is actually measured, because a lot of the data that's collected as far as sexual assault and murder and even abuse, there wasn't data that was being collected for men. Well, there's a couple of things. There wasn't data collected woman on woman rape, or women raping men, or I think men being in abusive relationships, these kinds of things. And that just is just a reflection of the times. This is a fairly new understanding of things. It's really been since like the 70s that this has even been acknowledged as a thing. So it's just kind of the next wave of awareness is understanding that, yes, men can in fact be victims of abuse and sexual assault as well. Marina says, yeah, the takeaway from the book Mask was Dr. Robert Hare, saying how he and all of the other psychopathy experts were all conned. They are such good manipulators, they can fool all of us. Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. I mean, you're generally with somebody, maybe if you're a mental health clinician, so really like a psychiatrist, or unless, and he was a psychiatrist, but unless you're doing, weekly therapy, you're not seeing a person on a weekly basis. Like a psychiatrist might see somebody for 20 minutes. There's no way. I mean, unless they're a really terrible manipulator. But if they're any good at what they can do, and a lot of them are, like it takes a long time to see that stuff. And even then, you're not going to be able to see all of their lies. It just is part of it. So, and I think we are way over. Yes, we are. I'm so sorry. I didn't set my timer. So that's what happens when I forget. So I apologize, you guys, for going over. Let's see here. Life After Gray asks about, are they more likely to poison their food? From what I've heard is women, and I think it does have to do with a size and strength factor, and maybe it's just more of a passive aggressive thing too. that women do tend to kill with poison, whereas men tend to kill with more direct violence, like aggression or guns or like these kinds of things. But, you know, with that said, like, that doesn't mean that men can't or won't do that, or vice versa. There's been, my gosh, if you never want to sleep again, there's all these true crime shows on the internet, and the ones with the female killers are just, I mean, they're just as horrific. So. And Jennifer says too, it's hard to tell if somebody's micro expressions are genuine or an accident, like a twitch or something. It's hard to trust your intuition sometimes. Yeah. And you know what? All we have to trust it to the extent of is if it's something just makes you uncomfortable. Like, that's it. You know, it's all, we don't need to know, like, are they a predator? Are they out to get me? And then, like, mace them in the face. Like, we don't need to go to that level. But if it's, hey, you know what? This person kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. That's all you need to know. That's it. And you just kind of back it up a little bit. And if they're somebody that's, I don't know, a coworker or somebody that you're normally around, odds are the more time, you run into them periodically, the more it's probably going to confirm you're going to have clarity on like why you were getting the heebie-jeebies from them. It's difficult to be honest with ourselves. And I think I'd mentioned this before, when I was in nursing school, one of the exercises that we had to do was to go observe people and follow them. One of them was follow them around the grocery store without freaking them out, but paying attention to everything. What did their skin look like? What did their hair look like? Was their skin crepey? Was it really pale? Was it kind of a bluish tint? Did it look thin? Did it look like paper? Was it really thick? Were they sweaty? Were they dry? Was their hair, was it shiny? Was it dry? Was it thinning? Were they overweight? Were they underweight? How were they dressed? Were they dressed appropriately for the weather? What kind of facial expressions did they have? How were they walking? Was their gait steady, or were they limping? Was it kind of shuffled? Were their clothes, appropriate for the weather? Were they wearing shoes without socks? Did they have swelling in their calves that you could tell? All of these little things. I'm not saying that anybody needs to go do this, but it was an interesting exercise because a lot of the people, myself included, had a very difficult time seeing other people for what they actually looked like, because it felt judgmental. Because we're so used to being like, well, I don't want to make them uncomfortable. I don't want to look at the fact that it's winter time and they don't have socks on and they're wearing shoes without socks. Or that this person doesn't smell very good, or that you can tell they haven't washed their hair in a week. Like, I just don't want to be rude, so I don't really want to notice these things. Very interesting to start seeing people. It doesn't have to be with judgment, but just observation. It's a totally different world when you start observing these things that most people were kind of socially ingrained to not look, because it feels rude or it feels bad. It feels, judgmental. But like I said, the medical side of it, all of that stuff's important, and it's not about judgment. We can't help patients if we're overlooking stuff like that. So it's really important that we catch all of that. So yeah, I don't know. It's just a different way of looking at things. But, and if something feels off, it's just kind of erring on the side of caution. Better safe than sorry. Then you can address it. And, I think just realizing that if that perpetual confusion is an issue. This is when I talk about making your safety and sanity an issue. Perpetual confusion negatively impacts your sanity. Perpetual confusion is concrete proof that there's a problem. If you don't normally feel perpetually confused around other people, then it's not you, that you're picking up on something from this person. And even if it's some sort of deep-seated thing that they remind you of your third grade teacher who was totally awful and, traumatized you with math, I don't know. If there's just no sense in continuing to be uncomfortable around another person, like you can still distance yourself, and you know what I mean? Like just maintaining peace in your life. So okay, let's see. Let's go into our guided meditation. We're just going to do a short one tonight because we are way over. So again, I apologize. Thank you guys so much for all your questions and your time and everything else. So let's take a moment. If you are new here, we do this every Wednesday night. Just take tonight we're going to take about 5 minutes and just get back grounded into reality, into this present moment, back into your body, realizing that even though we've been talking about all of the stuff that happened before, that we are here now in this moment. And so in order to do that, let's just kind of take some deep breaths and just reconnect. Allowing each breath in to expand your lungs, allowing your chest to easily and effortlessly rise and fall. Turning your attention inward, feeling your chest rise and fall with each breath. And bringing your attention to the feel of your heartbeat. With each breath, allowing any tension, stress, pain, or anxiety to easily and effortlessly just drift up and away from your body. Almost like a haze or a smoke. Bringing your attention now to your forehead, to the top of your head. Releasing any stress or tension. Relaxing your eyebrows, your eyes, your cheeks, and your jaw. Allowing your face to become heavy with each passing breath. Relaxing your neck and your shoulders. Relaxing your chest. Allowing your arms to become heavy with each passing breath. Relaxing your hands and your fingers, and allowing your arms to fall into whatever position is the most comfortable. Relaxing your stomach and your hips, your lower back, allowing your torso to become heavy with each passing breath. Relaxing your thighs, your knees, your calves and your feet, down to the tips of your toes. Allowing your legs to fall into whatever position is the most comfortable for you. Feeling the weight of your body as you allow yourself to relax. And continuing to breathe. Allowing that healing, restorative oxygen to travel deep down into the bases of your lungs. Healing and restoring every single cell in your body with each breath. Being fully present in this moment, realizing that there is a lot that is good and right and safe about this moment. And that you are here now. Realizing that everything that happened is in the past, and that there is still a present and a future, and that while these painful things might have happened to us, that they don't have to define us. That you can move forward into this next chapter in your life, and life truly is a series of chapters, and you are the author. So you get to decide when a new chapter starts and when it ends. And you get to write whatever you want to write in each of these chapters. So let's take some time. Let's take some time to just kind of connect to everything that is good and right with the world, because there truly is so much out there that is good and right with the world. There's puppies and kitties and a beautiful spring day, rainbows, ice cream, if you're not lactose intolerant, a good cup of tea or coffee, support from some of the people here on the chat. And there's so much that is good and right about you. That you're courageous, that you're dedicated, that you're interested in personal growth, which is puts you in like the top 1% of the population. That's powerful. You guys are thoughtful, intelligent, capable, brave. Just so many things right about you. Compassionate, caring. So many things. Let's just take a few moments now to focus on the things that are good and right with the world or within you. And just let's take some time to just be grateful for that and to acknowledge that. And this isn't minimizing anything that we've been through at all. It's completely separate. We can still be grateful. We can still experience joy and peace and happiness and a full range of emotions, even though we went through so much pain. We don't have to wait until we're fully healed in order to experience these emotions. Taking time to be grateful for the strength, the inner strength that you do have, the health that you do have, the support system that you do have, the intelligence and determination and just warrior level of strength that you do have. When you're ready, come on back. Go ahead and open your eyes. So thank you guys so much for being here. Bogart says, happy little trees. Yes, happy little trees. I like that. So, okay, guys, have a wonderful evening, and I will see you guys next week. So, lots of love to you as always. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you really can move forward and heal from this. You can. So, lots of love to you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Good night.